Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Goedemorgen.
Goedemorgen allemaal.
Niet alleen hier in de zaal, mais aussi en ligne. Indeed, we are streaming this also online on Facebook and on the web pages of PS Women and ZIJkant. So, as you have heard, we will be using 3 languages because we have here a European conference by PS Women met de steun van ZIJkant, de Vlaamse Socialistische Vrouwenbeweging, et l'honneur d'être reçu par l'Hôtel de Ville de
and also welcomed by the City Hall of Brussels. Brussels, capital city of Europe.
Promote us today, of course, feel free, not just because we're here gathered, but because the issues we will discuss today are important. And I think that maybe on the screens we will have the hashtags that you will be able to use. Unequal pay day, championing equal pay, or equal championships. So, instead of me going more into details right now, I will first give the floor to Zita Gurmai to welcome us all here and open this floor. If you need translation, don't forget your headphones here at the back. Thank you. Zita Gurmai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lesia. Hello, everyone, and of course, a warm welcome on behalf of PS Women, who started this fight 2007. That was a pretty long time ago. But of course, we are the women organization of the Party of European Socialists. And being the president, of course, it's a pleasure to have, as Lesia already mentioned, to do it not alone. What can you do alone? I think it's important you need to get partners like ZIJkant. A big clap hands for ZIJkant for helping us to organize this event. And if I should have a wish to the city of Brussels, of course, I wish to promote this event, to tell other capitals led by progressive, that this is what they should do. 15th of November, this is the unequal pay day, which means that we don't need to do any work after because we are all paid for the whole year. So anyway, special thanks for Lesia, who has been a PES Women coordinator for long years and a great colleague of mine in the PS Women team. And special thanks for my colleagues, for ZIJkant colleagues, and for the techniques and for the interpretation. Enjoy the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zita. And now I would like to give the floor to Vera Klaas, Secretary General of ZIJkant. Vera, het is aan jou.
The floor is yours.
Good morning to you all. Good morning. I'm happy to start my welcome with good news. The gender pay gap in Belgium is closed. Yay! The problem is solved. The problem is solved. We can all go networking with a cup of coffee and have a nice day. Well, at least that's what the Belgian media wrote a few weeks ago. They based their communication on the release of the new statistics from Stadbel, the Belgian Bureau for Statistics. The percentage of the Belgian pay gap has diminished to, here, 0.4%, according to the latest statistics. And it gets even better. In the French-speaking part of Belgium, women earn more than men nowadays. So people started congratulating me. Vera, you're doing well. Well done. After 18 years of organizing equal pay campaigns, you can now retire. Okay. However, a closer look learns that these statistics not even take half of the reality into account. Stadbel only calculates the pay gap between full-time workers in private companies with more than 10 employees. But in Belgium, as in the rest of Europe, many women work part-time. In Belgium, it's 42%. Moreover, they make out the majority of employees in public sectors as healthcare or education or in small companies with lower wages. And these aren't counted in the Stadbel statistics. So I'm afraid the equal pay reality is just slightly different. Dear Alderwoman, dear experts, dear European and Belgian friends, dear guests, dear champions for equal pay, on behalf of ZIJkant, I wish you a warm welcome in this beautiful room in the Brussels Town Hall. Before I switch over to my mother's language, let me make it clear. We aren't where we want us to be on closing the gender pay gap. But we are on our way, and that's good news. And we are here together to take further steps towards closing the gender pay gap. Europese vrouwen
European women on average earn 13% less than European men. And that is why there is an unequal pay day, and this year it'll be on the 15th of November. That is the point in time when European women will no longer be paid compared to their male counterparts. So we could say, indeed, that from the 15th of November onwards, women work for free. So we might as well go to a cafe. And that is contrary to Equal Pay Day. That is the point in time when women earn as much as men the year before. Since 2016, ZIJkant and the colleagues of PS Women work together in order to put the pay gap on the agenda. And we are very glad to have found allies to put this topic high on the European agenda. ZIJkant has been the organizer of the Equal Pay Day in March since 2005, and we've worked together with our friends of ABVV FGTB. Our campaign films have been organized with the Mortier Brigade, the best communications agency in Belgium, and we've been able to reach out to millions of people on social media, and we've also won awards on national and international fora. So I'm very enthusiastic because we will be able to see our new film in premiere, so I hope that everybody will share it from that moment on. But rather than focusing on why it takes so long to reduce the pay gap, I would like to try and find solutions today to bridge that gap. And that is why I'm so happy to have a number of national and international experts with us today. They will also help us to get the message across. After today, we should all become champions for equal pay. ZIJkant also knows how important it is to have everybody behind equal pay, because this would be a win-win situation for everybody, for women, but also for men. For women, for men, but also for employers, for employees, for the public sector, for the private sector, etc. Now, if we would take parental leave, for example, in Belgium, women spend 5 times more time at home than men. And it is not because We do not want these women to have as much time with their baby. They deserve it, but we also want men to have the possibility to spend more time with their baby, because this unequal division also leads to a division of care duties that is difficult to change afterwards. Usually, when people start out on the labor market, wages are equal, but gradually, as people grow older and become parents, the pay gap widens. It would be good for women to have the same opportunities on the labor market, and for men to have the same opportunities to be at home and care for their children. And for the employers, of course, this is also positive, because they would have more motivated workers. So parental leave should become identical to maternity leave. And of course, we also plead for good daycare, for good social security facilities, so that full-time work can really become a right for everybody. We've seen how important this is during the COVID pandemic. We know how essential these sectors, such as the care sector, are. For this, of course, we need the right legislation on a European level, but also on the level of the member state, because we need pay transparency and we need to fight against pay discrimination.
It's not by chance that we are here together in this wonderful meeting room, because the city of Brussels is committed to improve wage fairness. As an equal pay ambassador, we are welcomed here in this city hall. Brussels is really playing a pioneer role and can be used as a source of inspiration for other public authorities to promote equal fairness. And I would like to thank the older woman, Lydia Mutbieli-Ngoy, therefore.
We would like to invite you all to go to the website of Equal Pay Day and sign the Equal Pay Pact, so that we can all become ambassadors. And I wish you all a very inspiring conference today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera.
Thank you, Vera. And it is very good that you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's. It is indeed true that the pay gap has not disappeared. We need campaigns of movements such as PS Women and ZIJkant, but we also need the commitment at the highest level with Helena Dali as a commissioner. We need engaged women on a local level as well.
I'm now going to give the floor to Lydia Mutbieli, who is here in Brussels in charge of equality. I just heard that you are also an ambassador for equal pay. So I would like to welcome you here on stage. Thank you.
Mesdames et messieurs, en vos titres de qualité.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to all of you in your different titles and qualities. I would also like to welcome Vera and Zita. Thank you very much for being here with us in this beautiful building as a symbol, because just if you look around, there are only men there on the wall, but thanks to you now we have women, and the voices of women are heard here today. I would also like to apologize for our Burgomaster Philippe Claus, who would have loved to welcome you all this morning, but unfortunately was not able to be with us today. Once again, I would like to thank you for organizing this day of debate and exchange today. The gender pay gap has been a well-known problem for decades. However, it is far from being solved at Belgian, European or global level. In the private sector, of course, where differences in hiring rates and pay gaps are sometimes very large, even when genders share all the other factors, degree, type of job, experience, seniority. But we also have to admit it to a lesser extent, and it's also in a more indirect way, but it's also present in the public arena. The city of Brussels and more generally all local, regional and federal administration in Europe have introduced equal pay systems over the last few decades. But I don't think that any professional sector, private or public, is totally free of stereotypes and systematic problems concerning women at work. And these factors are non-exclusive and often reinforce one another. For instance, the unequal distribution of household tasks and time spent with children. I am a victim of this because I have to leave you earlier today because my children are on holiday. Then another trend to divide jobs and branches mainly occupied by women into part-time jobs. The impact of the glass ceiling and societal representations of management in companies, which are consciously or unconsciously internalized by men and women. There are also other differences and therefore other forms of discriminations, for instance, sexual orientation, ethnic origin, lack of knowledge of one of the national languages, skin color, religion, or a visible or less visible disability. A more intelligent approach to the integration of these factors seems more than necessary if we want to progress. And the aim of our meeting today is to address this issue, to theorize about it, to understand what is at stake, and to exchange good practices and very practical measures. All this in order to become actors of change and in the hope that we will not have to wait much longer for equal pay to become reality. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very fruitful day.
Mevrouw Moutier-Bele.
Mrs. Moutier-Bele, thank you very much to the city of Brussels, because I am convinced that it will be a very good ambassador for equal pay, and I can also give you this little present, and I hope that the message will get across to as many people as possible.
Thank you once again to you and to the city of Brussels, and I really hope that many other ambassadors of equal pay will follow today and later in the year, thanks to our different activities at all levels. I would now like to invite the participants of the first panel, Laetitia, Michaela, and Geneviève. I would like you to join me here on stage.
Thank you, ladies, for joining me for this first panel, Champions for Equal Pay. And in a second, you will all hear why they are champions for equal pay. We have heard in the introductions some of the gaps, the reasons why there is still a gender pay gap. I think we all know them, so I will not go into details about that. But what I would like to hear today here with this panel is what is actually being done to close this gender pay gap. We have here someone, Laetitia Thiessen from FEPS, from the Foundation of European Studies, that has a European perspective on the issue. But we also have two women from another perspective, but equally important, the local perspective. Michaela Kauer, who is responsible of the office of the city of Vienna here in Brussels. Welcome. I mean, you are a driven feminist, you work around urban policies, so you will tell us how those two can be combined and what your perspective is on the issue. Et on a Geneviève.
And we also have with us Geneviève Le Tourneux. Geneviève comes from Rennes, the city of Rennes, and you have also conducted different actions at a local level to close this gender pay gap. And you're going to tell us a bit more about the different initiatives later.
European level, because I don't know how many of you know that actually at European level, Commissioner Helena Dalli, the commissioner responsible for equality, has put forward a proposal on pay transparency. As Vera Klaas mentioned, the pay gap at European level stands at 13%. That's the average. But we have countries where the smallest pay gap in Luxembourg, for example, is at 0.7%. And in Latvia, for example, where it's at 22.3%. So there is big difference between member states. However, we need to make sure that all member states do something to close the pay gap. And we believe at the European Commission that the first step is to make sure there is pay transparency, so that women and men have the ability to have information and to compare their pay with their colleagues in order to know whether they are paid equally for the same work or work of equal value. So this was put forward by Commissioner Dalli, using some of the good examples that exist in Europe. At the moment, they are negotiating, the 3 EU institutions, with the aim to hopefully soon find a solution, a common approach, and have this as EU law. This all said now, Laetitia, you have been doing some research, lots of reading, comparing what is happening within the EU in terms of closing the gender pay gap. We heard Belgium has already a law that addresses this. We know that Spain also has some good laws, but can you tell us a bit more? What is, according to you, good examples in Europe that we should know and that we can look at its implementation and good practices?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to stress how happy and delighted I'm to be here today. So I would like to specifically thank the organizers, particularly PES Women, but also ZIJkant. It's a real pleasure for me to be here, not only as a representative of FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, where I work as the policy analyst for gender equality, but also as a Belgian citizen, to be able also to do this in such an amazing venue. And so more specifically, I was asked today to present some of the findings that we have done in this policy study at FEPS, which is a policy study that we have conducted in partnership with our French member Fondation Jean Jaurès, and with the very precious contribution of one of the main reference stakeholders in the domain, and that is Fair Pay Innovation Lab. And I'm actually quite happy to see one of the co-authors of this report here in the room, namely Henrike von Platen, but also it was co-drafted with Katinka Bose and Christine Grebe. And so as we sat together with the authors, our main ambition here was to actually set a sort of cartography of the best practices out there that are existing in Europe. As you mentioned before, the proposal that was set on the table by the European Commission is taking inspiration from many good practices that are already out there, and so we wanted to know, well, what is actually the leveraging effects. In fact, we know that fair pay has reached a very critical point in the debates and discussions, and many countries are indeed sharpening their policies, implementing fair pay and combining different approaches from targeting the individuals, but also corporate structures, collective agreements, as well as the dissemination of information. And so that is why I would like to more specifically draw on the examples of these countries that are analyzed in the policy study, starting with the UK. The UK approach can be characterized by radical transparency. Indeed, thanks to the 2010 Equality Act, companies are obliged to publish data on the gender gaps if they have 250 employees or more. And that concerns not only the gender gap itself, but also the gaps in bonus and the distribution of women and men in different wage qualities. And so here we have organizations' data that is published on governments' websites. And what we saw is that within a year after the implementation of this measure, it raised a huge public debate on the importance of the pay gap in the media, because countries, or at least the press, started to pick up which were the countries that were the best performers, the lowest performing countries, and also it shifted the conversation more generally towards fairer working conditions, whilst at the same time also advancing the discussion on the measurements of the gaps beyond gender, and so that would also include other grounds of discrimination, such as disability or sexual orientation. However, what also needs to be said is that due to the pandemic, the reporting deadline was postponed. And so here again, this is sending a fatal signal that in times of crisis, gender equality priorities are decreasing. So what the British case is showing us is that pay transparency is essential, but that naming and shaming is only one first step in the right direction. What is also needed are sanctions. And so now I would like to also perhaps cite the example of Switzerland. And here the strong emphasis by the Swiss approach is on regular pay analysis. In fact, with the 2020 Equality Act, businesses with 100 or more employees are given a deadline for checking their pay structures. And so by July 2021, they had to carry a pay analysis, which had to be repeated every 4 years, and the Swiss Federal Office for Gender Equality provides a standard tool for analysis. The downside of this is that, again, there are no sanctions, and that there is no standard procedure for registries for companies. And again, the fact that these checks are made only every 4 years leaves also much time for the gap to reopen. Now comes the next example, and here I'm taking you to Iceland. We all know that Iceland is a bit of a pioneer when it comes to tackling equal pay, and here more particularly because Iceland is setting the focus on standardizing fair pay. As you can see, or perhaps not so well because the graph is a bit too small to see, but nevertheless, thanks to its new Equality Act that was adopted and entered into force in 2018, Iceland practically made it illegal to have pay discrimination in the labor market. And it did so by introducing specific standards, and perhaps that is something we can come back to later on, but nevertheless, it's important to note that here, in case of non-compliance, there's also a per diem fine that is imposed to companies, meaning that companies will face 100 euros, 400 euros of fine on a daily basis for not complying with this certification. moreover, this Equality Act was again updated in 2020, and here introducing a revolutionary idea, because it went beyond the gender criteria, but also taking into account not only gender, but also actually recognizing the intersectional dimension and ensuring that non-binary people are also protected by equal pay provisions. A quite different approach is adopted in the case of Germany. Here, there is really a strong focus on individual actions. And so indeed, the Wage Transparency Act in Germany forces that companies with 500 employees are obliged to report on the share of women and men, and are invited to review their pay structures. However, here the major focus is on the individual rights to disclosure. And so that means that, for instance, in companies with more than 200 employees, a worker can ask to know the median average of their co-workers of the opposite sex. But nevertheless, the point is that it is up to them to take it to court, and very few cases have actually been that far to bring it to court. And in fact, there was a survey in 2019 that showed that only 4% of the employees have used their right to disclosure. And one famous case is this journalist of the ZDF who is still in this very long journey in the courts trying to make the case that she was earning 800 euros less than her male reporter counterparts. That brings us now to the case of France. France is interesting because with its Equality Act has introduced a sort of index. And that index takes into account not only the gender pay gap, but also other challenges that women face on the labor market that include returning after maternity leave, that include their representation in the higher position, and different other challenges that go beyond the mere gender pay gap. And if companies do not comply with this requirement, this also means that they will face a fine. And last but not least, we have the example of Sweden. And Sweden is interesting because here it adopts a much more holistic approach to equal pay under the motto, fix the system, not the women. And so here it's already since the 70s that individual taxation is in place and has been in place to ensure economic independence as a focal point. And so here the taxation reform has also motivated many women to work full-time, for instance, because we know that this is also one core element. Nevertheless, the Swedish picture is also rounded up by transparency and fairness enshrined in the Swedish way of life, also encouraging, for instance, everybody to check the wages and taxes of others at the Swedish tax office. So I think I'm going to stop here, but I hope that this gives you already a first good overview on the different measures and tools in place across Europe, and I also highly encourage you to take a look at the details on the website.
Well, thank you very much, Laetitia, on taking us on an equal pay tour in Europe, highlighting the issues and the important things that need to be done. I mean, I recall that public debate first to raise awareness what the issue is about. That pay transparency seems to be essential in different countries. But not only that, if there are no sanctions, if there are no fines, this is not going to work. That law is actually important. You mentioned the Equality Act in Iceland, and I know that many countries look to Iceland for good practices. The right to disclosure seems to still be an issue, indeed. I mean, how hard is it to go to court and then get your case there won? It's something that needs sometimes lots of courage, lots of time, but should not be discouraged indeed. And then, as you said, and that also in the opening remarks, the different gaps on the labor market. So let's fix this system, and not the women, as the Swedish say. And that's where I would like to hear now from Vienna and Rennes what the good practices are that you are doing at local level. Vienna is known for its gender mainstreaming policy. That's the example that Vienna is about, that I know of. But on pay transparency, what has Vienna done? Michaela?
Well, is this working?
It should be.
I think it's working. Do you hear me? Okay. Dankeschön. Hartelijk bedankt. Merci beaucoup. I'm really, really happy to be here today. I feel very good in city halls. Working for the city of Vienna, I love to be in city halls. I always go to city halls, and this one is one of the most beautiful, after Vienna, of course, I'm sorry to say that. Anyway, coming from Vienna, as you so friendly mentioned, we have this very strong approach to mainstream women's rights, gender equality in all policy fields. And with regard to equal pay, I would say this has to do with the fact that, obviously, we are not competent as a city administration to change anything with regard to wages in the private sector. This right to collective bargaining is to the trade unions, to the Chamber of Labor, Chamber of Commerce, to the national legislator. But what we can do in Vienna, I think it's two things. First is we can do something for the women working for the city of Vienna. We are a big administration. Yeah? We are 60,000 people working for the city of Vienna, and that has to do with the fact that we are a province and a city. We are one of the 9 Austrian provinces. We are the capital city of Austria, and we are a city administration which runs hospitals, firefighters, kindergartens, schools, the waste management, water, forestry. So we have a very broad portfolio of tasks, which means that we have 60,000 people working for us, and 2/3 are women, close to 2/3, 62%. So what we saw in our case is also that obviously, if you are a nurse, you can be a woman or a man, you should earn the same things. If you are a gardener working to take care of one of our many parks, you get the same salary whether you're a woman or a man. But what we found out quite some years ago already was that there are always these add-ons to your salaries. Yeah? They are like these add-ons when you're not only just getting the money for the job you do, but for instance, you're doing something very hard, difficult. For instance, cutting the trees. And there was an add-on to your salary to cut trees in Vienna as a gardener. Very special little example. But we found out that there was a big add-on for cutting trees and a small add-on for cutting trees to your salary. The big add-on was always given to men because they had to climb on a ladder to go for the high branches of the tree, which is so dangerous that we cannot have women going up the ladder. And the small add-on for cutting the trees were for women because they could do it when, just standing on the floor and cutting the trees with some little not electric instruments. So that was already an invisible discrimination that we found, and we found it systematically in many of our salary schemes and in the city of Vienna. And this is something we could change ourselves, and we did. And we have very strong and strict legal provisions now for women and men to have the same salaries and the same chances, for instance, also to get all these add-ons, which make a big difference, not only in your current salary, but also in your pension in the end. So just a small example what you can do for your own personnel. We do, of course, a lot with women promotion schemes, which is also important to reach equal pay in all the levels of the hierarchy. But what we are doing really is trying to influence all our stakeholders and partners as a city. When we do public procurement, for instance, and we have a call for tender to whatever it could be. It could be to provide us with furniture for our offices. It could be asking for catering for an event. All of these. Many other things that we can do, but just take one of these examples. And we call out, we give a tender, and then the companies are coming to us. We check, have they violated equal legal provisions in our labor law? Have they had court cases? Have they been punished by law because they did discriminate women? Because they did discriminate women with regard to sexual harassment or not following the rules for equal pay. And if you are like already in that blacklist, you're not going to have a contract with the city of Vienna. So using public procurement, and we are a big city, as I told you, and we have a lot of contracts, is something where we can try to steer something in the outside. With regard to gender mainstreaming, and as my last example, Licia is already looking at me. No. With regard to gender mainstreaming, we always try also to see into things like public services. Public services are essential, we are convinced of that, for the quality of life of women. Strong public services. And the focus is on public. Keep it in your hands. Never sell it to, I don't know, any big company out there. I know there's a lot of examples at the moment where cities are desperately trying to get back the public services they have been selling years ago. For instance, one example is, of course, the privatization of the public railway in the UK. Everybody knows that. But water in Paris, housing in Berlin, we have a lot of these kind of things. We never sell our services to anyone because we think they're essential for the quality of life of everybody, but especially of women. And one example I can share with you is here on public transport. First of all, we all know women use public transport much more than men. Very often public transport system, we just discussed it, are less, however, it's an invisible female majority, and it's not always reflected in the quality of the network. But still in Vienna we have very good public transport, but we extend it all the time because we have we are a growing city. We are close to 2 million now. And we are having a lot of new urban developments and construction and housing in, of course, the rather outside areas of the city. So we need to have high potential public transport lines. So we extended one of our metro lines to the north, and we saw that this changed immediately the employment patterns of women because as they had the opportunity to go very fast to the city center for the good jobs, for the well-paid jobs, investing in public transport makes sense, of course, also with regard to gender equality. And that's just one of the examples that I wanted to share with you because I think that the city can do a lot, even if you are not responsible and legally competent to do something for equal pay. You can do awareness campaigns. We do a lot on that. We, of course, also have measures for people with special needs, like young mothers with very little or no formal education. We have programs for those. We have training programs which we run also to change your jobs, to go from the traditional female care jobs, to, for instance, to the new technological jobs. So we run programs for that. We do a lot to encourage young girls to go for the non-traditional jobs and schemes, and we do this since 20 years now. The Girls' Day, or Daughters' Day in Vienna is a very successful example where we see, but it takes time, after 20 years, that we have more young women and girls choosing professions and educations in the MINT sector. So mathematics, informatics, etc., natural science and technology. You need time, you need money, you have to fight for the money also in Vienna, but we do it, and that's my last word, we do it because we also force everybody working for the city of Vienna and dealing with money to apply gender budgeting principles. So each year when you prepare your next annual budgets or when you report about what you've been doing in the past year, you have to make a comment about what did you do for women and what did you do for gender equality. And I think that this is something where we can also go for the European level to have this more. We know that on EU level there is room to improvement in many of the policy fields to apply these kind of principles as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. So I was right in saying that Vienna is an example in terms of gender mainstreaming. You just gave a whole list of examples. Those actions that Vienna is taking directly to ensure equal pay with this add-on to salary examples, I imagine that that has to do also with the way you describe a job, the way you value certain jobs and the way you then pay for those jobs and being able to compare. So it comes a little bit back to what we heard before in terms of comparing and transparency of pay. Investing in the public sector. I mean, I think that, you know, investing in public sector is a whole other debate, and maybe we can organize another day for that. But, but indeed, how investing in public sector is investing in women, because one, women represent a big part of the workforce there, but also rely on the public sector in order to combine their work engagement, but also to their private responsibilities and so forth. So thanks for that, and I will come back to you later. But maintenant, j'aimerais bien entendre.
I now would like to turn to the representative of the city of Rennes. So, dear Geneviève, welcome to Brussels. You come from the city of Rennes, municipal advisor in charge of women's rights and the fight against discrimination. You have just heard the example of Vienna. What is your take on this? Do you have similar measures, and what has the city been doing to reduce this gender pay gap? Good morning. First and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me. It is a real honor for us to present what we are trying to do in the city of Rennes. Thank you very much for organizing such a conference, because this is what we need. We need to share, we need to be inspired, we need to listen to one another. There are some key references, and Vienna is one of them, and I have to say that this is quite impressive to be sitting here on this panel next to the representative of the city of Vienna. Of course, equal rights between men and women. This is extremely topical. This is a theme that is cross-cutting also, and it's great to be able to think about this gender mainstreaming in all policies. It is also possible to act in an indirect way when working on public procurements, for instance. And I think that as far as the public procurements are concerned, we should invite companies to really invest in a gender equality policies. I think that it's important to make a contribution to the plans in public transportation companies. And I think that we should do the same with the companies with which we work. I have in mind a more general example. In the city of Rennes, in the years 2000, we have been able to conduct an experiment. The cleaning staff, we worked with them and we made sure that they could work during normal working hours. We have been able to show that it was possible to improve the working conditions of the cleaning ladies. And this example has been copied by local cleaning companies. They drafted a charter of the working hours during the day, and now we do have cleaning companies that commit themselves, and they say that their staff will be able to work during normal working hours, so no longer very early in the morning or very late in the evening, so that those ladies can still combine their private life with their professional life. So those companies that sign this charter accept and agree to have cleaning staff working during the day. Now, the gender mainstreaming is of the essence. Now, in the city of Rennes, since 1995, we've had a special delegation working on women's rights, In 2006, we signed a very important right, the European Charter for Equal Rights between men and women. This is a benchmark, and this text is very important. Because sometimes people think that it's just a woman's idea, but it's not the case, of course. The city of Rennes has also been the first city to obtain a label given by the AFNOR as an equal right city. So this label played a key role in our various policies. As we want to reach equal rights in our public services, we do have this gender mainstreaming that is to be found in all our human resources policies. We also see it in the social dimension, followed by human resources. And we also see this gender mainstreaming in our plan to fight discrimination. We do have human resources action plan. Gender mainstreaming is also included in the hiring procedures, access to information. So now, what are the actions to reach this gender, or to cope with this gender pay gap? Because it is about recognizing the situation. We currently live in a society, in an economy, where the issue of a pay, of a wage, is of the essence. It is, in a way, a measurement tool. Of course, it's not nice to value things only through salary, but it's still important. So it is important to identify the sources of those inequalities. In 2016, we have been able to measure those pay gaps in the city of Rennes, thanks to a committee that was set up to address those issues. You know that we did not have those tools in the past. So we have been able to conduct a survey, and we realized that we had an 8.4 gender pay gap. Nowadays, it's a 5.4, and today, the measurement system is not stable. So this is a real problem. What about the sources now, or the deep root causes of those inequalities? It varies from one profession to the other. Each profession is based on a premium system. And those premiums represent a high proportion of the salary. 26% in the security sector corresponds to the premiums. As an average, it is 13%. Then you have also the various careers. Do we really think that men and women share the same opportunities? Do we think that they have the same progression opportunities? And when you analyze the situation, you know that within a same profession, you have categories. And within those categories, you have several layers. So we would have men and women in the category C. You would think that it's almost the same, but if you take the executive functions, you will see that there is always a gap between men and women. What about the other sources of inequalities? Working hours and part-time work. In 2016, part-time work would explain 2 reasons why we have a gender pay gap. Part-time work is essentially female. 33% of women do work on part-time in the municipality of Rennes, and I think that it's about 8% for men. Part-time work is a real problem. It is a real issue. Because it is actually an individual answer to the difficulty of combining private and professional life. And when the employers accept part-time work, they do realize, or they do agree with the fact that the domestic time is free. So the use of part-time work is really key. And in our various action plans, we have been able to suggest alternatives to part-time work. How is it possible to combine private and professional life? We do have an adapted week, thanks to which we can have some free time, but simultaneously to that, you have longer working hours on those days when you are working. And so this is important because there's no impact on the retirement schemes. We are currently working on this notion of working time flexibility. So we try to find new avenues, and we try to inform individuals about the consequences of part-time work. Because this is about finding more flexible solutions. And we know that the situation is not always beneficial to women. We have been working on another theme when it comes to child care. There, of course, part-time work is very often used, and it means that we have to take into account how difficult some professions are. And apparently, we are not doing great with taking into account the difficulty of some professions. And most of the time, those are female professions. So we know that it's important to take into account the difficulty of some professions, the institutional recognition of how difficult a profession can be goes through some social conflicts. We see that most of the time we have seen those fights in male-dominated professions, and I'm always wondering why the female-dominated professions are struggling with recognizing how difficult their profession is. Or maybe this is in our mentality. Maybe this is because we say, no, this profession is not that difficult. Or I do not know whether this is linked to a culture. But I think that mobilizing, going on strike when you work in the care economy, it is true to say that sometimes you tend to focus on the others and you tend to forget about your own well-being. This is something we see quite often when you are looking after the elderly. For instance, you are not necessarily going to go on strike because you know that those elderly people will be left alone. Then there is a third possible explanation of pay inequalities, the exposure to precariousness. There, for instance, we know that in some professions you have incomplete professions. It means that you have an incomplete salary. So people would have to use limited time contracts. And so in those types of contracts, we know that there is an over-representation of women. And this leads to precariousness, and it leads also to the poverty amongst workers. So you are working, but you are still in poverty because your income doesn't allow you to have a decent life. This is something that we have seen, and over the last few years, we have been trying to fight this precariousness. We wanted those who work with a limited contract, we wanted them to have the same rights as the other. The access to training, for instance. We really wanted them to have a much more stable professional situation. It is also about setting clusters of persons who can replace you. So we thought that it was important to have those clusters of persons who could replace you. If we take child care, for instance, we know that sometimes the carers are on sick leave. It is important to find persons to replace them. In the schools as well, we have many professions linked to animation for the extra schooling time. So there as well, we have been able to recruit persons per school. We have been able to recruit recreational animators. And so this is a real profession for those persons. And if I may, maybe a last source of inequality, professional reconversions, and this is in line with the fact that we do not take into account how difficult the female professions are. If we take, for instance, those who are trying to find a new job because they do not have the possibility to continue with their profession, we have an underrepresentation of women. That's the reason why we wanted to be there to support women, to help them find a new profession, to urge professional and vocational mobility, because this is a way. Well, I'm a little bit distracted by the noise outside, but this is a way to cope with the professional wearing off. Well, I do not know whether I can still continue. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the example of the city of Rennes. It seems that it's party time outside. So the city of Rennes is also using its example as a public service to implement structures to better balance the professional time with the private time, with individual responsibilities. You also wanted to lead by example, and you talked about the public procurement and the charters that can be signed at local level. I think that this is something that is taking place in many municipalities, and this is a very good example now. It's important to see how it can translate into politics. You also talked about the label, and I think that we will come back on this afternoon, how important it is to have a label. This is paramount for public authorities that can really show what they are doing. And now I would like to turn to the audience. But just before that, you have heard all those examples. So I would like to ask you, what could be the take-home message from what you heard? Or what should be even promoted? Or what is the hardest? So we talked about gender mainstreaming. You talked about the influence on salaries in the city of Rennes as well. There are more female-dominated professions. You talked about the part-time work. What were the difficulties and what could be done at EU level? What was actually the trigger? Just maybe a short answer from our panelists, and then I will give the floor to the audience.
Laetitia,
I'll,
go ahead.
I'll get the ball rolling. Well, 1 minute is very short to address all the different challenges, because I believe there are still too many. But perhaps what we can learn, especially in relation to the policy study that we conducted, is the importance of transparency. And here, again and again, we cannot repeat it often enough, because there is a clear also scarcity of legal cases that regard equal pay, simply because workers do not have access to that crucial information. And so many times they also rely quite simply on the goodwill of their co-workers, willing to give them that essential information in order to be able to actually place that complaint. So transparency is key, and that is also why the proposal that was put on the table by the European Commission is so crucial in actually making this happen, and in also forcing companies to disclose this essential information. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but perhaps also to raise the point on the crucial role played by sanctions, because as long as there are no sanctions, there won't be a clear drive for change, and companies will still find it too easy to break the rules. So if we want change to happen, we also need to give a real bite to this kind of measures. A third point that we draw from this policy study is also the importance to move beyond the traditional gendered approach, and also to recognize the intersectionality of the problems, because we know that also not all women are faced in the same manner by inequalities on the labor market, and it's also important to be able to, for instance, understand that, for instance, women, because of their sexual orientation, because of their ability, or because of traditional gender binarism, do not face the same problematics. A fourth point I would like to raise here is the need to focus on all organizations and not just on the bigger ones, because in the examples that I cited earlier, many times the problem here is that the measures only apply to companies above a certain threshold. So the case, for instance, of Iceland, France, Sweden are quite encouraging, because they already apply as of 25 employees, and usually women are concentrated or tend to be occupied in companies that are smaller rather than bigger. So that's also important in order to ensure that everyone is concerned by those measures. The fifth point, according to this policy study, but also generally what should be understood, is that we need to follow a systemic approach. And so here the shift should be removed away from the individual, that should not always have on its shoulders to place the complaint. And so here that is also why, again, the Commission's proposal is important, because it is shifting the burden on the employer, who has to prove that there has been no such discrimination. And in a way, it's also important to encourage, for instance, more men to take up care duties, so that women have also an equal chance to contribute on the labor market. And so, generally speaking, what is important also within this systematic approach is to understand that the gender pay gap is only one tiny fragment of the problem. And so we need to be able to look at the whole picture. What is women's participation in the labor market? We often say women have entered the labor market in the 60s. But if we look at the picture there, we understand that they have always worked. women were in the fields. Women were actually working in the household, looking after the children. It's just that their work was not recognized as such. And so, of course, then there has been a shift. They have been highly concentrated in feminized sectors. But we also need to look at the details of the figures. And so that is why also, for instance, the example of the Belgian case where supposedly the gender pay gap has disappeared is misleading, because we are not looking at the fact that women are highly concentrated in part-time work. We are not looking at the fact that, for instance, women tend to be under-occupied, and many times it's not necessarily a choice. It is a bit of a forced choice because they have no alternative to be looking at. So the gender pay gap is one important component, but we also need to be looking at the bigger picture. And I know that I have to wrap up, so I'm not going to elaborate too much more. But I think a last very important point is the value of work. And here COVID-19 has really played an essential role in making societies understand that care is taking a central place in our life, and that women are overwhelmingly the ones to be shouldering that, and that this, again, the fact that women are shouldering this so-called dirty work is also an obstacle to them in their professional lives. And so that is why we need to take this as an opportunity to actually change and question what is the value attributed to work. And here, for instance, there is actually a really good book by Laetitia Vito, who is a future of work expert, who is actually claiming that productivity is incompatible with feminism. And she makes a very strong statement here. Simply because it is true, productivity, for instance, is ignoring the value that is produced by care work. Why is that so? Productivity, for every productive work, we also have to take into account that there is much more unpaid or underpaid work behind this. And so that perhaps should raise the question, what is productive, what is valuable, and what is women's contribution? So I will stop here.
Thank you, Laetitia, for this very complete analysis. But I'm happy to hear that you say pay transparency is essential. Indeed, that's what we try to do at the Commission, to push for that. That sanctions are important, that then also the size of what companies can be targeted with such measures, and then the whole systemic approach. Indeed, it's, I think, a question of how we structure our society in order for everyone to be able to work, to be recognized for the work they're doing, being valued for that work, and to have also a private life, whatever that private life may be. So it's looking at that whole aspect of our society that needs to be maybe readdressed if we want to close the gender pay gap and all the other gender gaps that exist. If from the Vienna point of view, you have anything that you would like to highlight? I mean, do you agree with some of the aspects that you've heard or that Laetitia just put forward? And what were the points that in Vienna were the ones that were able to change or had difficulties to change?
Yeah, I agree totally with what both ladies said. Just with regard to what are the difficulties, I think that indeed bringing things into a legal provision is the hardest always. And I remember Johanna Donal, she was the first woman minister in Austria. And she had one interesting and very true sentence. She always said, more women means less men. And that's so very true, but it's also very, very hard, because having men accepting, for instance, that they have to step back in order to give women equal chances. This is we're talking about the mindset, about cultures, about long traditions. So that's something, and this is something you don't do by convincing anyone, by just talking to them all the time, but it's by forcing them on a legal basis. And I think achieving legal adjustments to all the things that we've been discussing is the hardest. And we have to be aware that, Laetitia has mentioned it, we had so many crises in the past decades. I mean, we've forgotten already that we had the global financial crisis in 2009 yet. So we're in multiple crises, and what we I think have to look at is, can we secure that legal basis? really into details. In Vienna, for instance, we said, okay, now for our own employees, we have this, Equal Treatment Act and women promotion schemes, etc., etc. But really go into the details and, for instance, ask the guys why it's again a man going for the interesting conference where there is visibility for the department, why is it again the man going for the business trips into the interesting places like Brussels and others. So all of these little details in equal treatment, they also count. So, and here again, it's hard because there's where you have to negotiate and fight for concrete persons and concrete jobs. And I think this is a little bit more adding to all the other things that I absolutely agree with.
Thank you. Indeed, ZIJkant provisions are important, and as you say, we are seeing that despite the achievements we have had so far on gender equality, a crisis can sometimes put that in a very fragile situation, changes of government sometimes as well. So, legal provisions, let's keep fighting for that. Et donc, d'un point de vue de Rennes, qu'est-ce qu'on peut dire qui...
Regarding Rennes, what was, let's say, more of a challenge? What would you like to say as a conclusion? Well, to conclude on such a huge subject, I would say that we are in the middle of a societal transformation. So, first, regarding gender equality in terms of wages, we need more stability regarding the teams in charge of human resources. We need stability there because this is a technical issue. We used to say that we're all in favor of equality, but no, we have historical challenges here. We also have societal, psychological dimensions, and you have to take everything into account. Stability is essential. You need to have people who have been trained regarding gender equality. This is a key factor if we want to progress. We also need means, resources, but not only financial resources. We need to have human resources to moderate and share this equality message, which has to be spread but also assessed and made visible. And the gender budgeting is essential for any organization, but it's difficult. It's difficult to know exactly how the budget will be shared, and it's very difficult to do, I mean, practically speaking. And there is no treatment or vaccine in terms of equality. You know, I am from the left, a feminist. I have girls, so of course I'm in favor of fairness, of equality. But it's not enough. We are dealing with societal transformation challenges. So we have to turn this into practice. We have to turn equality into practice. Okay, gender equality is just one element of the puzzle. We need to go further down that road. How are we going to implement this? We have to translate equality in terms of management, of power, especially political power. Political power is very often associated with domination schemes, which are at the root of a lot of equality challenges. We're also facing populist resurgence and our rule of law, democracy is threatened. We have to go beyond gender equality, between men and women. We have to go beyond that. We need to integrate the notion of intersectionality. And we have to promote a culture based on equality, which will lead to hope, to flexibility and creativity. If we do as before, business as usual, we are going right into the wall. When I discussed with my human resources team, I told them, if you want the organization to be dynamic, just integrate this notion of equality. We can also promote exchanges between categories of work, jobs, which is essential for public services. We need to promote equality within our public service administration. And finally, equality is a three-step process. First, transparency. We need to know where we are, so we have to measure. Second time, we have to show evidence. We have to highlight differences in treatment. And sometimes what is difficult is that we tend to accept inequality or discrimination. So we need to show that this is not acceptable. And third time, we have to change our mindset. Stereotypes are just a way of representing the reality and communicating to with one another. So we have to build representations of the reality which are fair, equal. How can we be a man without entering into the stereotype of domination and violence? So a three-time process, but with many different steps in between. So a very difficult process. Okay, so continuity, stability, resources, taking stock of the situation, knowing where we are and where we want to go, power, responsibilities, if we want to progress in terms of equality. So thank you very much. We still have 5 minutes left, and I would like to grasp this opportunity to see whether you have questions.
Questions?
I see a hand.
Dank u wel. Mag ik mijn vraag in het Nederlands?
Thank you. Can I ask my question in Dutch? Yes, and I will translate. In Belgium, we want to get to a reduction in working time so that the household tasks and the care for children can be better divided, which would offer more chances to women during their career. From your own research or from a local field, do you have any experience or do you have any examples that this could indeed have that effect?
If you want to answer the question, I will translate for her.
Yeah. So basically in Belgium they have collective bargaining and they looked at what can be done in terms of time reduction for women vis-à-vis childcare facilities. Did you look at that as well in Vienna?
La traduction n'a pas marché?
J'ai mis mon casque un peu tard.
Est-ce qu'on peut répéter la question et comme ça la traduction peut suivre aussi en même temps?
Je peux poser la question en français.
Okay,
si ça peut être. En Belgique, nous luttons depuis.
In Belgium, we've been fighting for decades for working time reduction. So do you have examples, good practices, where this could lead to balanced way of sharing household tasks and also to make sure that career promotion for women are better? Let me answer. If you take the different funds and recovery funds put in place by the European Commission.
My brain is in French, but okay, je vais continuer en français.
Okay, let me continue in French. Within FEPS, we conducted a study to see to what extent recovery plans or funds were gendered, because we've seen that there were criteria related to digital climate, but not for the care dimension. We also identified a paradox, because recovery plans are there to meet the crisis and to overcome the problems of the crisis. So to what extent are member states going to answer to this challenge? In the case of Spain, for instance, so this is not only related to working time reduction, but Spain is going to introduce reforms, changes, so that pensions of women are going to be changed, adapted, because they have taken responsibilities regarding the care dimension. But this is based on the willingness of member states. But there is a trend showing that some member states are going to compensate for that by changing the amount of the pension given to women. Let me come back to the promotion or career process. When we identify discrepancies between career promotions of men and women, we have analyzed the problem, and today we have more women within our administration enjoying career promotions than compared to the rest of the population. Now, access to training. This is another important indicator, because it leads to more opportunities in terms of promotion. We reached 60% for women and 71% for men. So here, discrepancy in terms of access to training will fuel inequality in terms of career promotion. We have also organized exchanges or mobility opportunities. We have many jobs with women who do not have access to a computer, for instance. So this job fair or mobility fair targeting low wages jobs, this is something that was more profitable to women than other categories. Now, the fact that we promote a better balance between professional and working life again, this brings us back to a societal challenge. In France, we have introduced 39 hours, 35 hours a week. But what are we going to do with the time that has been made available? This is a very important question. The social tourism movement developed in the 30s or 36, because otherwise this is time made available, but what are we going to do with that time? So we need to ask this domestic labor question in a general way. And it's not an easy question. It's a very sensitive issue. We have what we call fairness, equality cafés, as we call them in French, café égalité. But this is very difficult. It's a very sensitive issue. Regarding the fight against violence, we have what we call the violence meter, thanks to which you can assess the level of violence of your family or household. This tool, I've seen a few examples of that, but we don't have something similar regarding work, domestic work. But we are facing more problems relating to mental load. So this is not something new, but it's very difficult. It's a very difficult topic. Thank you very much, Geneviève. This brings us to many other topics, such as the importance of the care dimension and the way in which we organize our life and the balance between professional and working life, not only for women, but also for men. So could you add something?
I thank you for the question, because I really think that this is important. But as knowing how the world is, I would go for the structural solutions always with regard to better distribution of the non-paid tasks in the family. So going for non-contributory kindergartens, going for full-time kindergartens so we can have full-time working women. For us, the problem at the moment is not to reduce working hours, paid working hours for women, it's to have more of them not working part-time. So, and as long as the mental load of all the organization of the private life is on the side of the women, I would always go for the structural solutions like better childcare and other facilities that support them in their job. Clearly also asking men to give their fair share to that, but and continuing, of course, of the fight for better quality of life for everybody, but keeping in mind that, again, this is not something that can happen automatically. Just because you reduce the working hours, it will not lead to having men, taking their fair share of all the other non-paid part of life.
Thank you, Michaela, and thank you to the three ladies for your contributions, for the good examples, for the best practices. I will give everyone the chance to talk to them later during the break directly, and then you can ask your questions, exchange with them as long as you want. But we need to close this panel, unfortunately, and then I kindly ask you to regain your seats, because then I would like to ask, thank you. Then I would like to ask Jens Morstiers to come and join me here. Everybody has been saying we need to have awareness-raising campaigns and we need to have men on board. So here is one of them. Jens. Jens. Jens is the man
So Jens is behind the funny and provocative video clips we've seen so often on the websites of PS Women in ZIJkant. So Jens, you run a communication agency, and since 2005 together you've been working together with ZIJkant on the topic of equal pay. So you have already made many campaign clips. You've won awards with those clips. Why is this still so important to you?
Thank you for having me here. I'm really proud and pleased. I must say I'm a little nervous too in front of all these strong women. So I made some notes in English, so that I don't forget anything. So let me tell you a little story first. When we founded the agency, Vera came to us and asked if we could help her with ZIJkant and create awareness for the great cause she was doing. She had no budget, which was exactly the point she wanted to make. But we believed in Vera and in ZIJkant and the cause you were doing. So we started collaborating free of charge. It might surprise you, but some people in advertising do have a heart. And it's been 18 years now that we are collaborating. Vera was our very first client, and yeah, I want to thank you so much for your trust, Vera, for all these years. Thank you so much. So these campaigns have been very important to us for several reasons. I think first of all, we do have, I think, a certain creative talent, and I think it's our our responsibility to help organizations, charities who can't afford expensive agencies, to help these people with the talent we have. We have to do something good and not only sell crazy stuff. And secondly, since these organizations often have a low budget or even no budget, and only a few times per year that they can make a mark, the work has to be very creative and provocative in order to have some stopping power, to make a mark, to make people think and act, so we can most of the time go all the way. So yeah, our team is able to do something good with great creative and provocative work, and yeah, we help great causes like you all are fighting for forward, I hope. And on a more personal note, my daughter is now started studying gender and diversity at the university, so here's a proud daddy.
Thank you, Jens. And so what keeps inspiring you? Or where do you get your inspiration from?
I must
apart
say
from your daughter, apparently.
Apart from my daughter, yeah. She inspires me a lot. Well, I must say the campaigns have been pretty recognized in Belgium and all over the world sometimes. So the pressure is high to come up with new things, but I think the team, since it is such a good cause, they are so motivated to surprise the whole world every year again with something special. We normally have to sell boring things like washing powder, and so it's a pleasure and a privilege that we can sometimes try to convince men to use the washing powder too. As you will see, that's the thinking behind the next campaign.
Okay,
yeah.
So you're mentioning the next campaign. Can
Yes.
I announce
Yes,
and
you can.
say that we have the honor of seeing now the premiere of this year's campaign provided by the Mostiersbrigade and worked with ZIJkant and PS Women. Let's all have a look now. So we will start this second panel, first with a video message from Member of European Parliament, Evelyn Regner, who is Vice President of the European Parliament responsible for gender equality issues, but she's also the rapporteur in the Parliament for the S&D on the Pay Transparency Directive that has been mentioned a couple of times. So we can launch the video.
Dear colleagues, dear fellow women, my name is Evelyn Regner and I'm Vice President of the European Parliament. I'm honored to address you today on this conference for which you choose a topic so close to my heart, gender equality and equal pay. As all of us here know, gender equality touches every aspect of life, from how we use our time, how we interact, and also how we are valued in society. Today I will address this in my context of equal pay and also summarize what we Social Democrats are doing on the European level to close the gender pay gap. As Shadow Rapporteur for Pay Transparency in the European Parliament, I'm currently working on a directive to finally have binding measures, because we have seen if there is no consequence for ignoring law, many will not abide. We would have to wait 132 years to close the gender pay gap. I don't want to wait that long. This is simply too long, and by the way, before COVID, we were down to about 100 years, also far too much. Also not great, but our granddaughters might have seen it. Now their daughters might not even. But before we look ahead, let us take a step back. The principle of equal pay has been enshrined in European treaties for over 60 years, but it has still not been achieved. Within European Union member states, the gender pay gap is currently at about 14.8% and exists in all industries, no matter if male or female dominated. From supermarket cashier to office workers and managers, women are paid less, simply precisely because they are women. And this unequal treatment is also reflected in the gender care gap. Women still mostly do unpaid work, such as childcare. Because of this extra work, they often work part-time, and as a consequence, they earn less and end up with a smaller pension, 30% less in average than men within the European Union, a vicious circle that needs to end. So what can we actually do to fight for the equal pay? In this Pay Transparency Directive, we are fighting for an important shift of perspective. The gender pay gap is a systemic problem, and the burden of addressing it can't be the responsibility of individual workers, but has to be on companies and, mostly importantly, member states. One key pillar is transparency. If women know how much their colleagues and people in similar positions are earning, they have leverage in negotiating. Another important pillar is collective bargaining. One common framework which applies to everyone in the same way, same rules, same conditions. And this common framework would bring men and women closer together and contribute to closing the gender pay gap, as long as within collective agreements we also fight the gender blind spots. It is essential to strengthen the role of trade unions. We know that the gender pay gap is much smaller when trade unions are involved. A very good first step was the adoption of the minimum wage directive just a few weeks ago. 60% of minimum wage earners are women. And if we make a living salary the norm, we can also start breaking the vicious circle of economic dependencies. So right now, it is essential that the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament follow with a strong directive on equal pay. And in the future, based on the data gathered by this one, we need to follow with a directive which addresses horizontal segregation. Meaning, why is someone who takes care of children paid less than a prison ward? The answer is shockingly simple. One is a female-dominated sector, the other one a male-dominated one. So you see, we are doing quite a lot, but we need more. We need real progress to improve the life of so many women now, not in 132 years. It is our moment to turn the many crises in which we are living into a chance and to get one big step closer towards a social, an equal and a feminist European Union. So thank you very much, and let us keep up the fight for a feminist tomorrow.
I agree with Evelyn. I don't feel like waiting 132 years either. So for the second panel, where we will talk about a win-win situation for employers and employees, I have here with us today Esther Lynch, Deputy Secretary General of the European Trade Union Confederation, Veronique de Bats, who works at the Belgian Institute for Gender Equality, and Sil Arnolds, who heads the HR department at ETS. Welcome to the three of you. I will start with Esther Lynch. I mean, I think about a year and a half ago, the ETUC was running a campaign around the Commission calling for the Pay Transparency Directive. And defending the rights of workers is your raison d'être. So you as ETUC, what do you see as the key role of the collective bargaining, the negotiations, when we talk about the Equal Pay Transparency Directive or on closing the gender pay gap? Evelyn referred to it, but you as Deputy Secretary General of ETUC, what's your answer?
So I want to start by saying that Evelyn is doing a fabulous job for all of us in the Parliament in trying to make sure that this directive gets over the line under the Czech presidency, which means we've only a couple of weeks left. And I think that's a critically important part of the work that she's doing, is to have it done now before the end of the year. So everybody here who has massive influence, anything that you can do to get this directive over the line by December, that would be really helpful. The reason it's so important to us is what we learned during COVID is that all of the narrative that work that's predominantly done by women is low skilled was always a lie, and it was shown to be a lie during COVID. And I think that's the critically important thing that this directive will do, is it will make that transparent. It will give us the legal tools that we need to be able to put on the table and say, why is it? Evan has a great example, which is care workers. Why is it that care workers are paid so little? It's because they're predominantly women. And what the directive will do is it will give us the legal tools to be able to say what are the skills involved, what the qualifications involved, what are the conditions under which the work is undertaken, what's the responsibilities that go with the job. And it will give us the ability to put that on the table in a way that we can bring the employers to begin to have a negotiation about re-evaluating the work that's predominantly done by women, caring, cleaning in particular, but not just caring and cleaning. It's also in the new tech sector, which is one of the thorough disappointments to me, that one of the newest sectors turned out to be so sexist, to be honest about it. So it's not a thing of the past, it's a dangerous thing of the future if we don't get the law right. The second piece of the gender pay gap, you're right, is it's not just about what pay you get, it's also about where and what type of roles women are getting access to, what type of promotion opportunities are available, and what strategies. And I'm really happy that there's people here who are going to talk about that, because that also needs to be very clearly part of the bargaining agenda. Like, we need to have plans in place in companies that have a good career structure for women within the company as well, so that they get the same access to the type of the type of jobs that allow you to demonstrate what you can do. And this is the final point I make. This is why in our own organisations as well, quotas are so important. I've benefited from quotas throughout my working life, both as a young woman and now as a middle-aged woman. And quotas never got me the next job. The only thing quotas ever did was they gave me the ability to demonstrate what I can do. The next time on that demonstration, you manage to secure your future and to advance. So I really want to make the case again for quotas. Anybody who's hesitant around quotas, I think that they have to be part of the discussion. a specific targeting of women, creating specific opportunities that allow them to demonstrate what they can do, and then on the basis of that for them to be able to make advancements. So that's why this directive is also important, is so that if there is a gender pay gap of more than, I think it's still 5% within the directive, and I thought this was an excellent thing brought forward by the Commissioner, this idea, that if the pay gap is a certain size, well then there's an obligation to negotiate a plan to close that gap. And that needs to be about pay and about opportunities for advancement.
Thank you, Esther. So I hear that the proposal of the Commission will give transparency to what's happening, and in particular show the lower paid jobs that are often women-led jobs. But you also say it's important to have women in place so that they can negotiate, that they can say where they stand, where they want the work to go, what type of work it is, and that also for the future, this will break current, still strong gender stereotypes. So it is quite an important piece of legislation. Apart from that, there is the quotas, there is the promotion of women in higher positions. So, but how, as a workers' representatives, do you convince the companies to follow in that same respect? And I ask this question to you now, and we will hear later from someone in the HR department.
Yeah. So there's lots of research that demonstrates that companies that are more diverse do better. There's lots of research that showed banks that had more women in positions of, in more decision-making positions did better during the financial crisis. All of the research is out there. The problem is we're still dealing with deep-seated attitudes and still the boys' club. The boys' club is still, I come across it all the time. So I think that there's a role for both good evidence, there's a role for partnership programs, for demonstration and for good practice, but that on its own isn't always persuasive. And so there's also a role for women to stick together and to call out what's happening. There's a role for us, you know, whenever we see discrimination, to talk up about that. Not to feel that, because I've noticed this recently, it's kind of like some outrage is unacceptable. And we need to be confident that when we see discrimination happening, that it's right to speak out against that. We don't have to only experience it ourselves, but if we witness it, we should be talking about it as well. And I think that's particularly important for young women, because the impression is out there that everything is fine for young women, and it's only older women like myself who ever experienced discrimination, and nothing could be farther from the truth. So I think it's important that we still name discrimination when it's happening and people speak up, and that we support people who are speaking up. And I think we also need to look at the new forms of discrimination. So if you don't mind, there's something else I'd like to ask for your help with as well. One of the key challenges that we see in workplaces now is employers' very bad response towards women who have been victim of their partner or ex-partner sharing intimate photos of them. So they would have given the partner pictures. It's called revenge porn, but I don't think that's the right word for it. Yeah? So they would have shared intimate pictures. And then what we see is the employer doubling down by saying to the woman, well, you're not right for promotion because of that. And that's a new form of discrimination. Brand new, but it's the old-fashioned stuff which is all about blaming a woman. Blaming a woman for something that a man does to her. So I think it's really important that that form of discrimination is also prohibited. And I'm sad to say we need a law that will say to employers, you cannot discriminate against women who have suffered that type of practice. And you can't discriminate in terms of letting them go, and you can't discriminate against them in terms of promotion. So sex discrimination, harassment, all of that is still alive and well. It just has a different face. So I think that we need to name it and we need to work together. And so we have the directive on violence, and that needs to be part of that, which is because this is emotional violence. And it's using emotional violence and it's using economic violence against you. It's about ruining you forever. So I think that That needs to be named for what it is, and we need within that directive to prevent employers doubling down on the abuse.
Thank you, Esther. Indeed, the issue of sharing pictures without consent is part of the Violence Against Women Directive proposal put forward by the Commission this year. To come back to the pay transparency issue, you say we need evidence, we need research. I imagine we also need monitoring. And there I will turn to the colleague next to you, from the Belgian Gender Equality Institute, because Belgium has been reporting on a yearly basis on the issue of the gender pay gap. Can you give us a bit more information on this good practice? Et je vous en prie, vous pouvez prendre la parole en français.
And you can use French. Good morning or good afternoon. I do work for the Belgian Institute for Gender Equality. In Belgium, we have many laws in favor of gender equality. I think that we are one of the champion countries when it comes to the number of legislations. We have a law on gender pay gap, but I think that we need to have a critical eye on the implementation of this legislation. In 2012, Belgium adopted a legislation on gender pay equality. It is based on the social dialogue model we have in Belgium. We know that Belgium uses this model, a legislation whereby social partners are obliged to address the pay gap at the various levels of the social dialogue, at the national level, where there is a negotiation taking place every 2 years to define the wage evolution over the last few years. Unfortunately, it has not been the case on a sector-by-sector basis, and this has been successful with the elaboration of sector-by-sector jobs qualifications that are gender sensitive. So this is a very important element if we want to fight this gender pay gap. And at company level, as this is the theme of this panel, I wanted to analyze what the legislation is requiring companies to do. So on a yearly basis, the Institute publishes a report on the pay gap. The data is updated and recommendations are then put forward. And by the way, we have here in the room my colleague who is in charge of this report. Last year, we issued very specific recommendations on how to fight gender pay gaps within companies. According to the legislation, once you have 50 team members in your company, as an employer and in collaboration with social partners, you have to hand over a report on the wage structure, explaining what the wage structure is all about within the company, and you have to highlight the possible issues. Then, this report is discussed within the Works Council, and if there is a gender pay gap, an action plan may be implemented by the company. So, the objective of this report is really to see whether or not the company is adopting a gender-neutral wage structure. We will focus on the wages, but also on the extra legal advantages. So this is a very interesting tool, because social partners have the onus to discuss the gender pay gap together with the employer, and it was not the case before. So, of course, this is the theory, but what about the practice? Social partners are a little bit helpless with this type of tasks. Why? Well, because if you have to fill in this form, you need to have some skills. It's not an automated process. It's not as if you had to enter data and then you would get the results. Second, there is very little data. You have the wages, the extra legal advantages, but for instance, you do not have the part-time employment rate and the breakdown between men and women. You do not know how many men and how many women are following training sessions. Nothing is said about parental leave taken by men and women. So this is a tool that is totally incomplete. On the other hand, we realized that this report must be discussed within the Works Council, but it should remain confidential, so there's no visibility about what's being said within the Works Council. So it is only fair because it is about private data, but then what about the monitoring? How can you know what's going on in the company if the data and the information is confidential? And I know that this is one of the objectives of the draft directive is to make some of this information public. And, we do have this very ambitious legislation, but Belgium is really slowing down on this transparency question. Because obviously, you can have all the legislations you want as long as they are not implemented. What's the point? And as long as this information is not made public, is not disclosed, what's the point? This information should be shared with the workers, male and female workers. They should be able to know what the male or female counterpart is earning. And this is really something that is lacking as we speak. This is what is missing in today's Belgian legislation. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for clarifying the situation. Of course, it is important to have a critical eye on the situation. I now would like to give the floor to Sil Arnolds, representing ETHIAS. You are considered as a good pupil in the classroom in terms of equal pay. We have just listened to Veronique. We know that reports are being published, but actually, it doesn't really deliver because there is a lack of transparency. So you can, of course, answer this first question, or maybe you can explain to us how you work and what you do on the gender pay equality.
Thank you for the invitation, first of all. Now, ETHIAS has a number of concrete actions, but before speaking about them, I would like to say something about ETHIAS. And that will probably show you how important it is to have a good structure within the company, because that can contribute to the Equal Pay Day. ETHIAS is an insurance company. We have a history of more than 100 years. We have more than 1,900 workers, and we've got headquarters in Liège and Hasselt, and we also have some local antennas and consultants that work with our B2B and B2C customers. What is our strategy? Well, ETHIAS wants to remain the number one for the direct insurance channel, also within the public sector, and also with respect to the digital channel. So that is our strategy. What has always been very important, and that is also part of our DNA, well, that's the corporate responsibility. Mr. Philippe Lallemand, who is now our CEO, took the initiative at the time, around 2000, in the field of corporate responsibility. We still have a social ethical code of conduct. We have an ethical committee that saw the light of day in 2003. And we also have a diversity charter and a diversity label. So a lot of initiatives have already been taken since the beginning of the years 2000. We've organized training sessions. We also have a non-financial report, which is something that we do not really need to publish because we are not a listed company. So a lot of initiatives have already been made. Now, up to today, and that is also important, Mr. Lelmont and the Executive Committee has also included ESG in the objectives of the company, which means that the top layers of our company think that the social dimension, for example, is extremely important. And this means that a number of KPIs will also be linked to those objectives. Now, within HR, we are not in an ivory tower. We want to contribute to this strategy. We want to contribute to it by creating circumstances in which our people can be their best selves so that we can reach our objectives. What are our priorities? Well, employer branding, re- and upskilling competences, together at home and at the office. And then there's also one other priority that we have within the Human Resources Department, and that is sustainable employment. We have a number of projects in this area, and what does that mean actually? Well, it means that all our workers, men, women, young people, older people, we want to keep everybody on board, and we want to motivate them and stimulate them so that they can work very good, and that all through their career. Within our board of directors, we now have 31% of women, 69% are men. We are also very proud because the president of the board of directors is a woman, Mrs. van Varenberg, and we are very glad because this shows that we're a good example. For the executive committee, we've got a ratio of 75% of men, 25% of women. So we've got 2 women out of 8 members of the executive committee. And these 2 women have important functions. We've got the CFO and the IT manager. So these are quite atypical functions for women. And then the most important thing, if we really look at our population within ETIAS, is that we've got 49% of men and 51% of women. And that is without having any KPIs. I think that we can really be proud of that. So these are key figures, and they are part of our recent history that started quite some time ago, and I think that these are excellent figures. Now, what about this social and ethical code of conduct? Well, we are not a non-profit company, so profit, of course, is important, because otherwise we would not have a business. But the social component is also important within ETIAS. What does this mean? It means that the well-being of our workers has priority. Not just the people within our company, but also the citizens, our clients, everybody within our society. During the pandemic, we also set up a number of initiatives for our customers, for our workers, and for society in general. I was speaking about our diversity charter. This year, we've audited our diversity charter, and we're now talking about a D&I charter, because you can use figures to explain whatever you want. We want to be an inclusive company as well. We really want to make sure that we are a company in which women can also evolve. We want to have a working environment in which everybody is welcome, in which everybody can be themselves and be supported. Why do we want this? Well, we want this because this can be a success for our society, but also for our company. It is important for our growth. And furthermore, if you have a good mix within the company, and this was also said during the first panel, we can be more creative, more innovative, and we can also perform better. That is also important. Now, there are also some concrete initiatives. We've got a well-being charter that we have drafted, and I've already heard somebody who said that it is important to measure things in order to have information. So it is indeed important to, first of all, have figures and analyze them. What do we stand for? What is important? Where do we find problems? What initiatives can we take? That is really important within a company. Now, we do this with Women and Finance. We've also signed the Women and Finance Charter. We also have an annual pay gap report that we do discuss with the Works Council. Based on our performance review, we have linked everything to a function classification, and this has nothing to do with gender. That is extremely important. Women can really identify themselves with these functions, and we think that that is important also when we have job ads, for example. Within our function classification E, we know, for example, that we've got a problem. But we also know that this has grown historically. There are a lot of inspectors within that function classification. And we've got a good seniority within ETIAS. People who work with ETIAS very often stay with ETIAS until their retirement. So these male inspectors, we cannot just throw them out. We cannot just tell them that we want more women. No. But the people, the men that retire now, we try to open up our job ads so that female candidates would also respond. And if we have two candidates of an equal value, then we will choose the woman. We also want the right man or the right woman at the right place. I am an HR director, and I would not want anyone to tell me that I am the HR director because I'm a woman. I want to be here as an HR director because I've got the right skills for that. So that is also essential, of course. We also have flexible working hours, which is something that is quite positive. This was discussed earlier on. Now, in our company, people can start between 7:30 and 9:30. There will be a lunch break between 12:30 and 2, with a maximum of 2 hours. And then from 15:30, so 3:30 in the afternoon onwards, people can leave. So it really is important to be flexible in order to have a good work-life balance. On the 1st of September, and this is just a small action, but what we do on the 1st of September is that people can show up late. And that means that everybody can drop off their kid or their kids at school on the 1st of September. So that is a very small action, but it's very important for our staff. We want our people to feel well, and this can have an impact on their well-being. Another initiative is that we have offered the possibility to take half a day of unpaid leave for children that live at home and that are younger than 25. Now, this was before all the schemes of parental leave and other working time reducing initiatives. Now, within the context of a collective labor agreement, we could say that only a limited number of people or a limited percentage of our workers can make use of such schemes at the same time, but we didn't do that. So that means that everybody can apply, but of course we also need to make sure that we can still get the work done. So sometimes it is possible that we need to postpone one of these schemes for a specific worker, but this does not happen very often. So it is quite pleasant for people to know that they can take up this time credit whenever they want. We have also introduced this for all levels, so also for our executives. Our executives can also take this leave to take care of their children. And during this leave, we also pay an additional amount. So there is the social insurance compensation, but we also pay an additional amount when women take maternity leave or parental leave, for example. And we also have the possibility for telework, and then we have training. Training is essential for us, and we also see that a lot of women, more women than men, follow a training within ETIAS. And then we also have the Young Talent Program. The Young Talent Program is an initiative that we set up with the universities of Liège and Hasselt, and we do have a KPI here because we really want 50% of men and 50% of women. Why do we have this KPI? Well, because we think that it is extremely important that young people can onboard the leadership trajectory, because we want to be a diverse and an inclusive company. So it is important that young people can really become the leaders of the future. So here we have a 50-50 participation that we want to achieve. That during COVID, we saw that a lot of women took leave in order to take care of their children. And we agreed with the social partners that for the group insurance, we would continue to pay the 100% contributions for those women who took the COVID leave. For the group insurance, normally we pay contributions based on the hours worked, but for the COVID leave, we decided not to do that and to pay the contributions for 100%. So these are just a number of concrete initiatives that we have set up on a daily basis. And what is really important in what I've told you is that the top also is on board, and we're very lucky because our CEO is. And it is quite pleasant for people to understand that the managers are behind this, that the executive committee is behind this, because if the top of the company is not supporting this, then I think that it will be extremely difficult to have everybody convinced. Thank you, Sil, for this very inspiring explanation. I think that it would be really nice to be working for you. But let me now ask the other two panelists. Now, if you hear this, I have the impression that a lot has been done on a voluntary basis because of the corporate responsibility, because of the initiatives on sustainable employment, because of the importance that the top management attaches to the well-being. Would that be enough for the workers' representatives?
Yes, that's willingly do this, or do we need the transparency measures or the Belgian law? I mean, isn't it a combination, and how can we then also convince those that are not as far as ETIAS in their thinking and doing on closing the gender pay gap?
Donc oui, moi je vais continuer.
Yes. There are companies which do a great job. And of course, we all know about the good practices of ETIAS. This is a very inspiring example of a company that is committed to bring more equality between men and women. This is really part of the DNA of the company. But can we leave this wage equality to the willingness of the company? We know that there are very good companies and good examples, but it's a minority. Otherwise, the wage gap would not be what it is today. So even if it's getting smaller, we know that the last 10% are the most difficult to get rid of. And it all depends on the way you calculate this wage gap. There are two options. The usual wage gap, which is really based on the difference in wage for the same job, same sector, same working time. And then you have another way of calculating the wage gap, which integrates other indicators, especially part-time work, because it's more than 1 out of 4 workers in Belgium, especially with less skilled workers. So this is something which is important. Transparency to us has to be compulsory. It has to be imposed and related to sanctions. It's only if we follow this road that we will achieve results. When I listen to all the good practices, and we already tackled the issue before, it's the way in which we share household tasks. This is also going to have an impact on days off, on holiday, and on part-time work. In Belgium, we have time credit, we have parental leave, and this does not have an impact on the pension and pension rights in Belgium, at least. But of course, you cannot take such holiday periods in an unlimited way. At one point in time, it's going to have an impact on your pension. So we will really make a big step ahead once a CEO or a very top manager, a man, of course, will decide to work half-time or 3/4 time. So this is something I would really want to ask to ETIAS. I would like to know if in your company you have top managers, men, who are using the system of time credit or parental leave, and what is the share between men and women using this type of measures? So this is a question I wanted to ask you.
It's not the majority, but mainly during the COVID pandemic, there were men who took holidays and took leave to look after their children. It's not the majority, but we are very glad to see that some employees do actually do that, and that also people higher up in the company can take up parental leave. And that's very important because I'm talking about the years 2000, the beginning of the 2000s, there were still men who said, well, people that work part-time, we shouldn't give them any promotions. And then we said, well, why shouldn't we? And then they say, well, they only work 50%. And I said, well, it's not because you work only 50% of the time that you're not putting the full 100% into the 50%. And why shouldn't you be promoted? And that's where we also saw an evolution, so that people that are working part-time can actually be promoted. So we do see that changing. And we also see that especially young fathers are taking more and more parental leave. It's not yet at 50-50, but we do see that it is an upward trend, and we are very pleased to see that. And the most important thing from HR point of view is that we can talk about it, that we make it possible, that we do not say, well, no, that's not possible, that we try to look at it together and that we offer the possibility and that try to come up with a solution. And I think that that is a very important one. And equal pay is not just something for women, it's also for men. And I'm pleased to see that quite a lot of men are here in this room, because if it's only women that are going to fight for it, we will not achieve it. But if we can give good examples, make it possible to talk about it, that's very important. And to make it visible, that is also very important. Like, for example, the non-financial report that we publish, that we come to meetings like this, that we can inspire people by the small actions that we take. Thank you very much, Sil, for this very positive information, and to see that the progress is being made, and then that men are also taking up parental leave or working part-time and I always ask the same question about homework, whether that's also being more used in a balanced way. But I am also wondering what Esther thinks about this when you hear this. Are we headed in the right direction? And what are the things that you are still fighting for as ETUC when you hear examples like this?
So, it's always the case that you have a carrot and stick approach. So you've got great companies doing wonderful things and being led from the top with key performance indicators, where you say to the managers, getting equality right is important for our company and your success. Then we have, in the world of work, the exact opposite of that. You've got companies investing in toilets that you can't sit on for more than 2 seconds. Now, every woman here who's ever had a period knows why that would be a very bad thing, yeah? So the carrot and the stick is we provide opportunities to great employers to come forward and to say that. We congratulate their championing, and we should support it, and we should invest in it, and we should make sure that public, not saying this for ETIAS specifically, because I'll get into trouble for that, but we need to make sure that when the public authorities are spending their money, they're spending in companies that have a gender equality program in place. And that's also what we could make sure is in the directive. We could make sure and say that the trillions of euros that are spent in public procurement should go to companies that promote gender equality, that make sure that you have equal pay. Simple. That law would push that in that direction. But then we also need a fair set of rules for our single market in Europe. And the idea behind that is that there are certain things in which it is unacceptable to us as Europeans for companies to seek to get competitive advantage on. One of those is the health and safety of the workforce, so you can't seek to get ahead of your competition by having an unsafe workplace. Another of those already is, because of the EU treaty, you can't seek to get ahead on the basis of gender inequality, in particular equal pay between men and women. So this directive is needed to make sure that companies like ETIAS are not undercut by those companies that don't do any of that. They do none of it. Absolutely none of it. They rule by fear, management by fear. People terrified. Terrified if they're a minute late, that the consequences. Terrified because they're being monitored within a second of their lives now by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence looking at people, in particular women, who are in the service sector, looking at what your emotions are. You've got this constant eye now saying Esther looks 10% angry and 90%, you know. So that's so you've got some companies investing in that And what they will do is everybody who doesn't show up and not only do their job well, but doesn't smile enough for the customer, which is already the case if you've been to a hotel. If you've been to a hotel recently, you check in, and by the time you get up to your bedroom, you'll have a little thing on the phone, how was your check-in today? Was it smiley face or unhappy face? And the consequence of somebody just clicking, well, I didn't like it, is that that worker is terrified that they'll be the first person who loses their job or that they don't get ahead or something bad happens to them. And that is happening. So you've got this great world of work, inspirational leadership, but then you have this other thing, investment in technology, investment in, we'll say, making sure that you get the last piece of everything out of the workforce. And that's why we need the Transparency Directive. Because we need to protect the good companies from being undercut by the bad companies. And that's really what it comes down to. It's about, do we want companies like this to succeed and to be the future for our children and grandchildren? Or do we want that other world of work to succeed and to be the management model? And at times I don't know what's being taught in the schools of management, that that's the go-to skill of a lot of new sectors, is to terrify the workforce. So I'm absolutely convinced that we need this directive. I meet people all the time, I meet workers all the time who tell me there's still cases where you find out after 10 years that the man you're working beside is paid more. And that's because both of you have a clause in your contract saying you can't discuss pay. I still meet people who on the first day of their job were faced with negotiating their pay, or worse, at their interview. So you're at an interview and you say, well, what's your pay expectation? And all of the research says that women do very, very badly at that particular negotiation. You often read and say, women are bad negotiators. And that's not the case. Women are excellent negotiators. But what women are reading is that very often the man that they're negotiating with is having a very bad reaction to them asking for the pay that they deserve. Because women who ask for what they deserve are very often punished for that. And imagine you're at the moment where you're being interviewed for a job, you're reading the body language, you're not consciously doing it, you're unconsciously reading that body language. And so you settle for less. You settle for less at the interview, and then every year your performance review is on a percentage. But your baseline is lower than the guy who came in and negotiated his pay after you. So that's why we need the Pay Transparency Directive, to make it so that when you turn up at the interview, you know what the rate of pay is for that job. You know what the last person was paid. And that the employer that's interviewing you can't say to you, well, what were you paid in the job you're coming from? And can't base your pay on that. So, because then you're carrying the discrimination with you. You've lower pay for the last 10, 15 years, and then you show up and they say, well, what was your last job pay? We're going to pay on the basis of that. Well, then you turn up with your 15 years of discrimination and have it there. And all of those things, the Pay Transparency Directive will help us deal with. It won't necessarily make all companies become as good as this, but it will sure as stop the bad companies from doing those really, really bad things that they're planning to do, investing in doing, and doing every single day. So that's why I'm convinced we absolutely need the Pay Transparency Directive. And to get it, we need momentum, because the momentum is going out of it. And that was why I came here today, was to ask all of you who are committed to equality. I know everybody in this room. You wouldn't show up here if you weren't committed to equality. But we need all of you in your areas of influence, which many of you have, to make sure that that directive gets over the line before December.
Thank you, Esther. So I'm here for the second round that we need pay transparency, and we have a proposal for EU law, so let's make this now a law sooner rather than later. I've also heard about public procurement and the gender equality aspect of that being called for. I know that the European Gender Equality Institute has a report on that that can be very useful to look into that. We need good examples so that we pull all those other ones with us, and so that we make sure that across the EU, all women have the same rights and that all companies apply the same laws. And and stick to those same laws. We've had great contributions. It's 1 o'clock. I'm just looking at the organizers whether we have time for one question. One question, we can go ahead. And I see a very enthusiastic person here at the front row.
Thank you so much for your intervention and contribution to this topic, especially concerning data that is essential and has been a fight for women's rights, because we need those data to have results. Considering this, my first question is to Véronique Debatz. Je vais peut-être poser la question en français.
I'm going to ask a question in French. As a young member of an organization where gender equality is essential, we also focus very much on intersectionality. Ethnical census in Belgium is forbidden, which makes things more difficult. So I'd like to know how you are integrating racial inequalities in your reports. And what would you recommend? Do you think it would be a good thing to have data on this in the future?
For intersectional quotas and not only for women quotas. Voilà.
Thank you, merci. Très brièvement des réponses.
So very short answers. I will be very brief, very short. No. The answer is no. We don't take into account within our institution, at least we do not integrate such data. At a macro level, we include a certain number of factors such as origin, ethnical origin, but this is not part of what is compulsory at a company level, in the reporting at a company level. So the answer is no. But this is also a political issue. In Belgium, we have the gender equality, and we have institutions dealing with other types of discriminations, not only gender-based discrimination. But indeed, this is a very important question. But we need political decisions if we want to go further down that road.
So short answer, yes, but. So what you don't want to have happen, indeed we were a bit disappointed about the Women on Boards Directive. It's of no use to me if Donald Trump's daughter is on a board. Honestly, no, right? So there needs to be some measures put in place at national level to make sure that women in all their diversity, manage to get onto boards, and that will change things over time. Yep. We can't rely only on women, we need men champions as well, but that's what I would say on that. The second but is, and it's more just be careful in how it's constructed. It's not to do it, it's just be careful in how it's constructed. I remember when I was back as a union official, and I was taking cases, equality cases for women, either pregnant women or BAME women. And the employer always tried to have the comparator be, we say, the white woman rather than the male pay. So you just need to be careful that you don't actually create a false comparator. You've got to keep your eye on the prize, and the eye on the prize is the person who's paid the highest, which is most likely to be a white man. Yeah? And you don't want to create conditions where it's black women and black men, or you don't want to create conditions where it's black women and white women. Do you understand what I'm saying? You always want to keep in your mind very clearly and not create an argument for somebody who wants to deny equal pay. Not necessarily because of their ideology, they just don't want to pay the money. You know, so just be careful on that. So I'm not speaking against it at all. Please don't hear me as being against it, because I said yes very clearly. But just to be careful in how it's constructed doesn't create that false argument.
Thank you. And I was told that we have time for one more question. So if there is one more question, then anyone that wants to know? No enthusiasm? I think everybody is hungry. Yeah, maybe? No, we have time for one more. Laetitia.
I was actually curious because...
Just a second. Here is the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, many thanks for your very inspiring contributions. And I was just generally curious because the pay transparency, we know is very much about correcting the bad practices. But how can you also contribute to actually promote more positive actions and ensure that there is this culture shift in the workplace? We know that, for instance, especially equality bodies playing an important role in implementing certain checklists and implementing also gender-sensitive evaluation criteria. So how do we actually manage to create a workplace that is like ATS would be, and at the same time, how do you also manage to target those smaller size companies that perhaps have also more trouble to actually meet the standards?
Thank you. Yes, Sita?
Sorry. If you allow me, as I'm coming from a populist country, from Hungary, and of course the problem is that if we have countries like EU members on the board who simply does not want to take women as partner, the question is how can we put pressure on this? Because I had a small talk with my male colleagues and I said, okay, why it's a problem? When a man goes to the labor market, I want 100%, and he knows how much he wants. When a woman goes to the labor market, then we want 80%. So it's really up to us. So I think we really need to create a self-confident, much stronger self-confidence of women. And this is what I think we also need to take into consideration. So that's why I believe empowering women, this is also, or it has to be also a tool. I don't know how can the Transparency Directive help in that, but I strongly believe that it should be part. So thank you very much for this fabulous panel.
Thank you. I will give the floor immediately to the speakers, just so you know that the Commission is going to propose a legislative proposal on equality bodies. So there will be something coming up for you on that respect as well. But Sil.
Well, what we think is also very important is, for example, within our sector, in the insurance sector, with the Federation Assuralia that we have, and also Febelfin, we have created a group, Women in Finance. So it's we men, so it's both women and men, and we take a lot of initiatives to really make people aware about all kinds of initiatives that are being taken in other companies. We take them to the board of directors to show that what we do at Women in Finance, to make it bigger and to inspire other companies. And sometimes there are small things that you do, because often people think, well, I have to set up a major project, but that is not the case. It can also be small actions, and by going to these meetings from Women in Finance on an annual basis, it's something that is now really coming to life in that financial sector. And I think that is also important, that it's not just the individual companies, but also that at sectoral level you look at it together with the social partners to start up things like and projects like this. And that also helps us, Women in Finance, because there we really sign a charter with all kinds of different initiatives that you take as a company. Thank you very much, Sil.
Very quickly, it doesn't really answer the question, but I wanted to end with a positive note. Within our institution, we have made a certain number of recommendations which are already referred to, and the federal Belgian government has written down in its agreement that the wage equality legislation had to be more efficient. Lots of efforts have been made to improve the situation and to really transform this legislation into something that is a very efficient tool. So that's the only thing I wanted to add, and it's really something which is going in the right direction. We have a committed government, and that's something I wanted to say as a final and positive touch.
To add something? Yeah.
Yeah, so what I think is important for the equality bodies to do is to really support women workers to get their own agency. That the equality bodies don't seek to do it all for us, but rather to help us do it. And I know that's your vision is to help. Just finally on it, because I was first elected when I was 21, and it was so long ago. It was in a factory that made microchips that were the size of matchboxes. And it was for Ataris. I don't know if anybody here remembers Ataris, but if your Atari didn't work, it was probably me and some of my colleagues who were 21 and were having a good time at work. But the reason I was elected was because at the time in Ireland, you couldn't get the contraceptive pill without doctors choosing to tell your husband. And what I stood on was a platform to say, I will make sure that the company doctor doesn't tell your husband that you get the contraceptive pill here. That was, it was the 1980s, so it was so long ago now. But when the woman won that, it was magic. Like, it really was. And that's what the confidence and the agency and the trade unionism is about. It's about us being able to stick together and win what we need to win for ourselves and our pay packet, for our progression, for our, how we live our lives, how we become, how we just realize ourselves and develop our personalities. And that's the importance of the workplace. So if you're discriminated against in your workplace, it flows through into all the other bits of your life. And it helps everybody else who wants to have control over you to think that's okay, and then sometimes for you as a woman to think that you go along with it. So that's the real importance of supporting women to be able to join unions, to be able to bargain, and to get what they deserve. So everything that equality bodies can do to help women to be able to do that is so important. That's just how I find the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Well, I think that we can now round up this panel, and I think it's clear that we all have our bits to do, whether it's as trade unions mobilizing together, whether it's as companies setting good examples and putting forward good practices, or as institutes to keep us on our toes and being critical of what is being done, advising us how we can move forward together. So thank you. Ladies, merci beaucoup, dank u wel. And I think that now I can invite everyone to go and have lunch. We will be back here at 1:45. So enjoy the lunch and see you soon. Thank you. Thanks. Because it sounds very nice, sounds like an award to me, but how does it work? And maybe we will start with Aurore and Joop. Can you first maybe say something about PwC, who you are, what you do, and then maybe explain a little bit what this label, equal pay label is, and how the certification works, and what methodology you apply?
Yeah, sure. So I will keep it very short for what PwC is. We are a network of firms which is present in 152 countries with more than 300,000 employees worldwide. And we do assurance, advisory, and tax services. And part of that, the equal salary certification. And our purpose is to build trust in society and to help to resolve important problems. And of course, helping to close the gender pay gap is fully aligned with our values and our purpose. So we're glad to be here today and to discuss that. For what concerns the certification itself, it's a way for companies to demonstrate that they pay their employees fairly. That's a comprehensive pay audit based on a rigorous methodology which has been developed by the University of Geneva and which has also been applied in court successfully in Switzerland. So that's a very robust methodology. It starts from a statistical analysis. So we conduct a statistical analysis with a regression method. That means that the model will predict the pay based on the compensation policy of the company. So that's really tailored to the company pay policy. And then we compare that predicted pay with the actual salary of the employee. And if there is an unexplained gap, then the companies will have to explain this and to check whether the gap is explained by objective factors. And if not, they will have to come up with an action plan to remedy the pay gap. So that's the first step. And to pass to the second step, they need to meet two requirements. First, the average pay gap should be less than 5% at the level of the company. And the second criteria is what we call the R square. So as I said, the model is based on the company's pay policy, so they will provide us with the variable that comes into play to define pay. But we need to ensure that the model is reliable enough to predict the pay, so that's R square measure that reliability. So the R square should exceed 90% to pass to the second step. And as mentioned during the introduction, looking at the statistics, it's not enough. You can have a very good results in terms of gender pay gap at first sight, but actually you're not giving equal chance to your employees. So that's why we have a more qualitative analysis where we will do a desktop review. So we will review the HR policies, the processes and the practice of the company. We will also have employee survey and group discussions with employees to see whether what's their perception of the pay practices of their employer. And of course, we will also check what's the commitment of the CEO, the senior leadership of the company, because equal pay needs to be embedded in the strategy, in the objectives, and of course, it needs to be a follow-up on this. Then we will also review the special cases, as I explained earlier. We will review how the policies and processes are applied in practice, based on that, we will deliver a report with our recommendations and observations. And that's an independent third party, the Equal Salary Foundation, that will actually deliver the certification, which is a label which will be valid for 3 years. But it does not stop there. The company will have to have 2 monitoring audits, and the purpose of these audits, that's to follow up on the improvement, because the mindset of the whole process, that's the continuous improvement. So we will assess what are the actions taken by the companies on the observations that we made during the second phase, and with a specific focus on the special cases, so all the cases where there is a pay gap of more than 5%. So that's, in short, what the certification is about and how it works.
And so now that you have established what this is, how do companies receive such methodology and how do they work with it? Is it something that is easily to convince companies to apply? And I can imagine that when your result is maybe not so good, that companies get reluctant. I mean, Can you say a little bit more? How do you do this assessment and how do you accompany the companies to improve? That's...
Thank you very much for asking that question. I don't like to hear my own voice, but today it's nice to hear also a male voice amongst many interesting opinions we've heard before about equal pay, men and women. So we work, as already Aurore says, for organizations on we do audits actually. We don't sell the label, we don't deliver the label. We are doing the audit, and if our report states that indeed companies meet the requirements, which are both statistical and qualitative, then we deliver a report, and the organization will get the equal salary certification through the independent equal salary foundation. To which extent are companies interested? Well, the companies that come to us, this is not a mandatory audit. This is a voluntary audit. So the companies that typically come to us are those that are probably already quite advanced in their journey, and seek an additional level of confirmation, actually. So I think that if you say there is legislation, basically companies that will comply with legislation, they have if that's the first kind of criteria, then you have sort of a compliance mindset. Every company needs to comply, every individual needs to comply. That's not really going up and beyond to really make gender equality a true practice. Then you can of course do as one of the previous speakers was explaining, the head of HR of ETIAS, which I found a very inspiring talk. But what can you do as a company yourself? So you can comply with the law, fine, that's what we all need to do. You can also think a bit deeper and think about, okay, what can I actually in my organization do? How do I get this tone from the top? How do I embed gender equality throughout the employee life cycle? That's basically how I took away what we heard. And then I think the third level above it is to call actually an external expert and say, okay, I think I got my act together. I think but why don't you come and have a look? Yeah, so for me, that's the way how I see our added value in that process. We're coming as external experts. We're completely independent. We have a methodology that says, we run the regression. Henrika will also explain about that, how Henrika is doing. We run the regression, which I think is now the most commonly used methodology if it comes to equal pay for equal work. But as Aurore said, that's not everything. Then we go in the organization and actually listen to leadership. And one of the earlier speakers spoke about gender equal policies. We look at gender equal pay policies. We have done 300 of those audits in the last 5 years. I've never had a company that says we don't have a gender equal pay policy. Every company has that. That is basically, every country actually has in its constitution, even in the countries in the deepest part of Africa, equal pay for equal work. It's nothing revolutionary, to be honest. And every company says it as well. The real question is, what's happening on the floor? What's really happening in the recruitment conversations, in the performance management conversations, in the more informal decisions about careers? Who gets invited to join the boss on a specific project or a specific meeting? Access to education, etc. So what we try to do in our work is get under that layer of complexity and understand whether companies themselves understand how these kind of formal and informal decisions about whether it's pay in a narrow mind or in a narrow definition or in the wider definition, including access to career opportunities, etc. Whether a company that controls, and that starts with your data. Then we look at what do you put on paper, and then we say, okay, fine, your data is in order, your paper is in order. Now let's speak with the people and see what's actually really happening. What's actually really happening in your organization. That's kind of how.
And what is really happening?
Well, that's a very open question, right? What's really happening? The answer is it depends. But in general, it depends. At the same time, what's really happening is that lots of organizations, lots of employers are on a journey. I've never found the perfect company. It's also not what we are looking for. What we're looking for is helping companies to understand where their strengths are, but also where their areas of improvement are. And then what we seek in our kind of judgment, because we do make a conclusion with a judgment and we say, yes, it's a pass or it's not a pass. In the end, that's our very large reports tell you, is whether a company actually recognizes its areas of improvement and wants to put the resources and the means at the table to actually do something about it. So I'm not sure how much we spoke about it today, about, for instance, a simple having a salary grid, making sure you have a job evaluation in place, making sure you have procedures in place if it comes to performance management. Most companies, they are built upon meritocracy. Most companies in Western Europe are built upon meritocracy, which kind of implies that we understand how to measure performance. But we also know that performance measurement depends on which industry, which company, but there's always a level of subjectivity. And how do you make sure that that level of subjectivity, that you at least that as an organization you understand it and that you put the measures in place as much as possible to deal with that? And that's, for the HR specialists in the room, that's like making sure you have your 360 feedback, make sure you have your calibration meetings, make sure you have clear objectives and you measure against those objectives. Make sure your managers are trained on biases and unconscious biases and know how to recognize them and know how to interact. So there's an endless list of, let's say, tools and skills and procedures that companies can put in place. And yeah, that is also, I would say it's also a journey that is far from finished. So, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe to add on Joop, to share a story about the kind of feedback we can receive during an audit. So the audit, that's actually very valuable to have someone really external from the company. Because I remember a case where we were discussing with the employees in group, and we were discussing about the role models at the company, and there was actually a woman in the board at that company, and the employees said to us, yeah, this woman, she has no life. So we're okay. So then we had a lunch with that lady, and she explained to us that she was working part-time, she had a husband, and she had children. So then the feedback that we could give to the leadership was to clearly communicate about, more communicate on the role model, and to emphasize that, yeah, it's possible to have a private life and combine it with a senior role. So that was really important feedback for that company.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Enrique, when you hear this, is this similar to what you do with FBI Lab?
Yes and no.
Explain to us.
Let's see. I'm thinking if I should say something different from what I planned. I do. Okay, I do. Okay, let's throw away the plan. We've been working with this topic for, I don't know, I started in 2008, something like that, with the Awareness Rising campaign and the Equal Pay Day and all these things. So I'm going to give you the short story of why I end up saying why we're different or not. We should be doing this together. We will after today. So all was about awareness rising campaigns, and we figured out what happened in this, what's happening, what's sort of hindering us from getting there. We know the problem, we know where the issues are, but we're not solving it, so we need to go one step further. And that's sort of where our journey started. Oh, here I see it. Hey, now you can go one slide back, that would be nice. Yeah, you go back. Where's the button? And you can, yeah, and another one. So I'll mix up my other part. So you can see that we've been doing this for quite some time, and we tried to figure out how do we actually get the problem solved. And here next to me is sitting the part of the data analysis. So that's one big part of that. That's similar to us, or more or less the same. It's regression based. But another thing that we also looked at, what are companies already doing, and what kind of legislations do we have? So, thank you. So we combined the legislation that already exists in a way. We looked at like UK, we've been discussing UK before, with being transparent on the numbers. You can think this two-sided medal. You can look at Switzerland, who says we have this 5% hurdle. We looked at the Icelandic equal pay standard, which, opening the brackets, you can find a study now that we finished about the transferability of that standard to other countries. That might be interested for you, for some of your countries as well, to use that. So we looked at all these things and said, what do we do now that will combine all that and assure that a company pays fairly, meaning any organizational form that employs people. So it can be even cities and whatever you like, it doesn't matter. Anything can get certified or can follow the journey that we believe leads to fair pay, with or without certification, but follow that step, starting off with transparency. What we then did when we started that, we got some piloting companies to actually find out if it works, which were the first ones, and awarded them the first awards. Only the Icelandic companies managed to get the highest standards done because they have been working on this issue for quite some time. We got the patronship of the German Minister for Labor, looking for patrons in every country, actually. I like to say he's a patron for Germany and not for the Czech in total, to make sure that we switch it around the countries. And this year we actually managed to get, after a long time, after a quite hard process, through the unequal, to get it as a warranty mark, to make sure that we don't have a seal that sort of you pay something and you get it, but we wanted to make sure that it's like, we said, the quality stamp that we made got a quality stamp in a way by going through that process. That was very important because I personally don't like to choose my yogurt based on some biological seals, which I have no clue if they are real or not. That was why I actually never wanted to make a certification in the first step. So that was an important one for me. And if you look at these four steps, it's what we've heard a lot today. I'll just pass through that because you all know it's about transparency. It's the first thing. You need to be transparent. You need to be fair, meaning not equal. Equal isn't fair. People like to be treated fair, which means it can be unequal if it's fair. If it's only equal, it's not always fair. So that's a very important distinction. And it has to be neutral. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about binary or LGBTIQ. It's just about everything being neutral. So you have to have objective measures. And it's always a journey. You have just heard you do it like a 3-year one. We say our seal lasts for 1 year only because you should be doing it annually. So it's always about these steps. And how to achieve fair pay, which is often the question when I get asked like, okay, you say it's unequal, but it's fair, but what is fair? Everybody else thinks fair is different. Fair isn't, you can't sort of explain it with one sentence. What is fair to you might be different to you. So we say, if you want to be fair, think about football, think about 2 teams, and think about them being in their cabins separately before the game. And then they are talking about how they're going to play the next 90 minutes. And they're going to each set up some kind of rules under which they want to play the game. And then they go out onto the field and then they play. And you're going to have the chaos. But you're going to have exactly what you have now when an employee is coming to an employer and bargaining their wage. They are working under separate rules. They don't know the rules. So what we say is you need to have a clear set of rules. We've heard today before, okay, I bargain my wage, we should do something about that. Yes, of course we should do something about that. Companies need to say what they're able to pay because they know. If I produce something as a company, then I know how much money I need, how much money I'm going to get later when I sell it. So I know that story. I know how much I can afford to that value that I get from whoever employee to do 1 bit of work to get my product done. So why am I not saying how much I'm paying? Why can't I say the value that I put to the work as a company? That's the transparency that I mean when I talk about transparency. Be transparent about the rules under which you're employing somebody. And then you will reach like a fair system. And if you listen to that, here you see like the 3 steps, which I think are really simple, but I will keep to myself. There is a lot between in those small white lines. There's a lot in between. And here we come together very, very near actually, because we start off saying, you have to do an analysis of your pay structures. That's what we've just heard from PwC, the regression method. That's sort of inside the universal fair pay check as well. Why is that inside? It's standard, we know it, and we know that if you do that, you will then make the right measures to drill down your pay gaps that you have. We calculate the gender pay gap, taking the gender pay gap as the KPI that we want to sort of get down to 0. But in the regression, the company needs to analyze every variable that they can and that they have. We don't ask for a certain type of variable set. We say you analyze everything that you have. And then you choose the variables that fit to your culture that you would, in your rule set, make transparent and explain why they are valued or not. Performance being a very interesting one, because often it can't be measured, and then they actually in the end take it out. And they say, oh, we always thought we pay by performance. Looks like we don't. Or we don't do it really, or then we leave it out. Then suddenly the pay gap goes maybe a little up, but then they know why. So then we say, okay, when you've done your analysis, you will then be able to implement measures that actually drill down your specific pay gap at your company. Because you find out, for example, in Germany, the big old companies, they have an age pay gap, which is often for them a lot harder to tackle than the gender pay gap. So then that's sort of their big like piece that they have to tackle. But still, we want them to get the gender pay gap down for the certification. And we want them to get the adjusted below 1, plus minus 1%. I said before, we looked at legislations like Switzerland with the 5% hurdle, like the European directive coming up with 2.5%, we say 1%, below 1. We know that last mile is the hardest, but that means that they are going to implement measures, they have to implement measures that actually drive that down. So that's the part that we are not explaining and not saying how to do it, because the how will be different from company to company. And that's where we meet again with what you just said. So that's in there as well. And for the third stage, then they also have to go transparent on their figures, not on each and single the wage, but on their figures. And they have to drill down the unadjusted pay gap below 10%. The main measure always already having been the quota for that one, and saying, okay, how do I level the male and female through all the career steps of the career ladders in the company to get that down, to make it more equal there. If a company has like 50-50 male and female, it's already easier there, at least there. If you have a company with like only 20% female and only in the bottom, well, then it's going to take a little longer, but you will be working on that. So then we settled on 10%. If you know me right, I would have loved a 0 there too, but that's just not, okay. We settle for 10 and say they have to be transparent, and they also have to take over that leader role model and sort of talk about how to get there and what they do. And then they will have to say, okay, we're at 9.1, or another one says, well, we are already at 2.5, or wherever they are. So that's sort of that part. And to round it up, we have a screening board that sort of checks on this. The screening board changes every 2 years. The people change on the screening board. So we put our partners and others in there. It's a max of 7, so there's 1 free spot at the moment, which I'm searching. I have a secret wish who I want there, or at least what I want there. I don't know if that was a nice word now. I would like to have a white male CEO of a huge company on there, and I've talked to a few, so maybe that will happen, because I want like the company side in there, which is still missing. And the way that we do it is in that way different to PwC. We have a lot of partners. So the Equal Salary Foundation has like PwC as auditors. The FPI, being a not-for-profit, not a foundation, but a not-for-profit GmbH, has lots of partners, not only one. So PwC could stand there as well, starting tomorrow or whenever. Because what we do is we say, the FPI gives out the certification and checks the paperwork of the company, but we don't do the analysis process. That's for the consultants and the auditors to be done. We check that before we decide who can and who can't, but then they go on there and then they do the analysis. So we want to really make it in this way a lot easier and faster to spread. Because if all the companies out there that are already doing regression analysis now have the companies asking, we would like to get certified, then they go, okay, yeah, we prepare you. And the FPI gives you the certification. And then we're sort of done. And
you're done. Okay. I was expecting another slide, but okay, fine. Thank you very much. So if I can sum up, one does all the analysis and talks to the companies and sees what can be improved, what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, and you would be there to give the certificate. But would that be a certificate recognized by, I don't know, I'm going to say something random, the Commission, the European Commission, or would it be at state level? You also mentioned we need transparency. I think that that's something we've heard in the 3 panels. Everybody is clear on that, and still there is resistance from the companies. That's one thing, to make it public. We need the same set of rules. Yes, but if each company is using its own set of rules, how does that work? So these are just questions that I have put out there for you, maybe for reflection or for immediate reaction. We've talked about companies, but I think one of you also mentioned cities, governments. How do you work with them?
Where do I start? The recognition, you said, like recognition by commission and things like that. Of course, that could be done easily. That's part on the commission side to sort of decide if they would like to do that. What we tried to do with the Universal Fair Pay Check was, first of all, get the recognition of the unequal, which was sort of to make sure that the license agreement behind the certification, where everything is sort of written down, like how the regression has to work, all the things that, the how-to that you could read and say, okay, yes, we can do that, then that is sort of has a tick. Meaning that if that is, in your view, compliant to legislations out there, which we think it is in a way, then you could actually do that and recognize it and say like a patronship in Germany could be a European commissioner as well, a patronship. That's not an issue. So you could promote it faster. Cities, of course, too. I'm talking actually to Reykjavik city next week because I'm going to travel to Iceland from here. And I said any entity that employs people can be certified because that entity can do an analysis on their pay structures because you're paying the city of Vienna, the city of Brussels, you have employees, I don't know how much, 60,000, you could do that, no issue at all. No, you can do it with PwC or with one of the other partners, but you can do an analysis and then you can go forward from there and then you can get certified. Meaning it's always about, the only issue that we have is if you are too small, then the regression doesn't work. So it's this thing about 50 plus, but we are working on a model to do it for the smaller companies as well. That's just not part of the OIPO paperwork because it's just something, it's very hard because you can't do it database in that way. But they can, we have certified, but only for the first stage companies that are below 50. For the second stage, then it's very hard because the regression doesn't work. And then you had another question, which I liked, but I don't remember. Might want to ask.
Maybe I can just respond to the one on the label, because I think these are private labels. And I think what's very interesting from what Henrike is explaining, that she had the quality, how do you say it, with the quality stamp on the quality stamp. Huh? And you made the comparison with biofood, which I think is, you go to the supermarket and you see bio, you have no clue what you're buying. It can be, you've seen the Seaspiracy documentary on Netflix, that a great company puts some sort of label on tuna, and it's completely not biological. And that's the same kind of risk with these kind of labels, that there's lots of labels out there, but we could start a label, the 4 of us today, about the best Belgian fries, and start tasting fries and put a label on it, So I think this is important, that you need to have recognition in some sort of way, either by the European Trademark Commission, and the Equal Salary Foundation is, for instance, recognized by the UN Women EPIC Coalition, by the European Commission as well, and by the Swiss Confederation. So to comply with the Swiss law, you could use this label to comply with the Swiss law. So I think that is an important part of, if there's a label, that at least someone looks at it, whether that label is solid. Because you can easily... Yeah, we see that in Switzerland, where this, I think it was the first country where this idea of a label, an audit and a label was implemented. And we've seen that, I don't think that all the labels are actually really helping us to get there, to a more fair and equal pay world. because legislation also has the risk of being a bit of a tick the box exercise. And I think you were explaining, Laetitia, the Swiss law, where every 4 years you need to go through the self-analysis, except if you pass in the first year. And the majority, the law had been so much kind of eased down, and it was made so simple to pass, that 85% of the companies pass. And I know these companies, and they not per se actually meeting the requirements that we would have, but they pass, and they can put in their annual report that they comply with the Swiss law, which is apparently even quite a demanding law in the EU landscape. You know, so I'm actually, you know, if we going this way means that you need to think very carefully about. I mean, the UK law is also an interesting one. We put average and median pay out there. The data is never audited. Nobody looked at whether the data in the annual report is actually correct. You know, I mean, what are we looking at then? Sorry, I'm coming from an audit firm, so. But I think these are the kind of details that we don't like to talk about. And I think, you know, policymakers, legislators, they have the complexity of coming up with great ideas, but then it can't cost too much money to the economy, because hiring us, that would cost you money, for instance. So it has to be something that is almost for free. It has to be something simple, can't cause any administrative burden. And then you risk of putting something in place which is actually so much eased down that you may actually better not have a law, if you ask me, honestly, you know. So I think it's a very difficult topic that we're trying to address here. I think the labels are a good idea as long as you have a solid label where indeed your data is checked. You put a lot of details out there, but one of the things I really like is that you have this board, and it's a very technical thing, but it's a board that actually determines whether the data that you have been given is accessible in that format, which is a very technical, and we nerds would love to have a look at that. But you don't find that kind of stuff in laws and legislations because it's, you know, that doesn't pass nicely with the audience. It's too difficult. So I think it's actually quite a complex matter, more complex than it may seem on the surface.
Thanks. If I can just follow up on that, I'll give you the floor. So the label is good, but if it's certified with solid certification, I agree with you. I think that that's a challenge that we had come across at European level. But if I hear you, you say that yes, law can be in place, but can also not be sometimes that pushy towards the companies, but they still come to you for audits. What drives those companies then to show that they are doing well or where they want to improve?
I mean, we love new laws. We love new laws. It gives us great, you know, problems to solve in society. That's why they call us. We have new law, help us to comply. Great, you know. We send our people, send them a check. Not sure if that really solved the problem then, you know. And the UK law, again, putting averages and medians out there. I made the example over lunch break with someone. It's almost like it becomes a kind of societal entertainment to put on the front page of The Guardian that Ryanair pays its men 70% more than its women. It's completely irrelevant because most of the pilots are male and most of the air hostesses are female. So what are we comparing here? It's great to put Ryanair on and to blame and shame them because we'd love to do that, you know, but we haven't addressed the issue. The UK was one of the first countries where such a law came into play. Again, it's in constitutions all over the planet, it's in labor laws all over the planet, but these are kind of additional laws put in place to enforce what's already needed, what's already actually required. UK started in 2018, today is 2022, the gender pay gap hasn't moved. You know, so what was the purpose of that law? Well, the purpose, what was the impact of that law, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the companies that come to us and that want to go, they take that, I think personally, they take the topic actually much more serious. You know, to comply with the law is the basic. If you're a company, you need to comply with the law. So that's what companies, you know, tend to do. But the companies that go to Henrike or come to us, or go to another kind of specialist advisor, they want to know what's really going on. And that can also be, it can also be from a defensive perspective to actually deal with your potential pay discrimination cases. We have seen it a lot in the US, Google was fined with 160 million fine last month because of gender pay discrimination cases. I mean, that becomes a true issue if you have that kind of risks hanging above your head. And specifically because if you find that there's pay discrimination in your company, you will need to repair it going forward, but actually you also may have to make back payments. In some countries it can go back to 5-6 years that you need to make repairs, and then the amounts can go can go quite up. So anticipating new laws, anticipating lawsuits, or from a more kind of positively driven perspective, companies actually want to do good. You saw one example of the lady who was sitting in my chair. I didn't recognize so much the story of Esther Lynch, who was saying, companies are doing artificial intelligence to see if you're smiling or not, or they want to build fear in society. I worked for 25 years within companies and with companies. I haven't met many companies that actually want to, scare their employees. Europe is subject to a massive shortage of labor, and employers are actually trying to be attractive and attract labor. So you need to be a good employee, you need to understand what drives people, why do people want to work for you, why do people stay with you. So I don't say that every employer is walking the talk, but overall I see a lot of companies going in the right direction if it comes to this topic. And those who are not going in the right direction, fair enough, they will not call Henrico or me for an equal pay label.
So it's about ethical attitude, attractiveness, image, competitiveness. But Henrique, you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Yes, and it fits to all this in a way as well. It was one of your questions, like yeah, but if there is a rule set, and what do the rules say, and are the rules different? That was sort of, I remember that, and then I was thinking, okay, about fairness, and that's a very important part. That's why I want to really dive into that one a tiny little bit. Following thought behind that. If you think about fairness, and you've heard it can be different, and I'll start off with making sure that you know what the difference between the unadjusted and the adjusted pay gap is, because that's very important at that point. If you have the unadjusted pay gap, you're taking all your employees into one pot, and you take the average of the wages, and you have the unadjusted wage gap. Everything is in there, the pilots and the stewardess and everything. Now, you want to know the adjusted pay gap. That means that you look at the variables that you want to take into account that account for the wage. Those variables that sort of define the value of the jobs and the work. So it might be like the grade or the status, like the management and the senior management. That might be a difference in pay for those roles. So the roles are one variable. The gender is not a variable that you should be taking, because you don't want to pay males and females differently. So you're not adjusting gender. You are adjusting what the companies pay for. And then you have a rest that you cannot explain. And that's the adjusted one. If you cannot explain it, you want to get rid of it. Maybe there are some things that you can explain, but they're not fair. And now we come to the rule set. If you have a rule set, meaning you as a company know why you are paying, so you have your 3 or 5 or even 17 variables that you account for, and that are fair inside your environment of your company, and that are transparent, so that the people know that's why I'm getting money. For example, one example, some companies like to pay their employees more if they have a master degree or not. Other companies say, I don't care if you made a master or not, for this position you're still getting the same amount. You're not getting more just because you have a master. Both can exist in different companies. One company does it this way, the other one does it that way. So one accounts for that variable, one doesn't. Both companies are now working with different rules, and they're both paying fairly. And that's something that is inside the universal fair pay check possible. If you have a legislation that comes around the corner and now suddenly says, well, you have to adjust down to 1% and you have to use these 7 variables, all of you, I would say this isn't fair. So what I try is that the companies start to be getting there faster than legislations that come up maybe with this kind of idea. Now the question would be, how do you do a legislation that accounts for different rules? You look at the license agreement of the Universal Fair Pay Check and read it, and maybe you get an idea. But that's sort of a very important idea behind that, because we thought, how do we make something fair, which is fair because it's different, and accounts for with objective reasons. So that was, I think, that's one of the main important parts actually around this topic, I think.
Thanks, Enrique. So we need laws, but we need also companies that are willing to be advanced to the laws, and they have to go hand in hand, if I understand. I would like to turn to the public and see whether there are questions. I see a timid hand going up and another one there. So that's already 2. Here in the front, there is a question from the gentleman.
Okay. Thanks a lot. It was very interesting, and congratulations for this project and label that you deal with. So a disclaimer is that I missed part of this morning debate, so I may bring some subject that has been already discussed. When we speak about equal pay, I think there are 3 elements that we can consider. One is the basic pay, so the pay that you get as your basic salary, and then how this salary can progress along your career. And then there is a third element which is, can be more and more important in the private sector, which is the kind of reward, the incentive, bonus that you can get for your work, which gives also motivation and drive your career. I focus on this third element, but there are a lot of things also on the other 2 elements. It's known that in some sector, or also within some sectors, some companies, the way that you fix the targets, so that you measure then the merit, can be more male-friendly than female-friendly. Typical case is in the financial sector, where there can be targets where you are driven more to have financial risk, to take financial risk when you do your operations. And it's known that the women, they are less, they are more risk adverse, they are more prudent. In this sense, they have more kind of long-termism when they do their work. While the men, and this is kind of average, that doesn't mean that anyone is like that. The men, they tend to be more short-termism. And this can be also for other kind of sector, can be also for industry. If you are on sales, you can put targets which are very aggressive, or you can put some kind of targets which are more long-term. So my question is, how you can track this in terms of having this kind of variable pay, which is, let's say, female-friendly or equal, anyway, taking into consideration that we are equal, but we are also different. We have different attitude, and this is a richness. The difference between women and men, and the attitude that we can have on our work, if we are more short-term or long-term, if we look more to the well-being at the long-term or the maximization of the target in the short-term, is a difference that we have to give value. So how we can track this in your label? And the second question was about when you spoke about the case of UK. UK is also the job market where it's more flexible, which means it's more easy to hire and fire. So how this flexibility, which has grown a lot in the job market, can have an influence, positive or negative, in the fair play, not equal pay, but in the fair play between men and women. Because if it's easier to fire me, maybe as a woman, I will think twice to raise my rights. So to say, I have this right, because it's very easy that you can fire me. If you are in a system where there is flexicurity and more security, most probably you tend to defend better. You feel more protected, so you want to protect better your rights. So these are 2 elements. First question is how you can measure the female-friendly variable pay, And the second element is when you have a lot of flexibility in the job market, which is the influence on the fair play. Sorry to be long.
Thank you. I suggest we answer this one first, and then we go to the next.
Shall I take at least the first one? So the way we work is we do the regression-based analysis, which will not tell you so much about this level of detail, right? You look at your snapshot of your data, and you find basically equal pay for equal work, gender pay gap, plus the individual, we call them the special cases. Actually, we predict a gender pay gap for each individual. We can simply say, if you would have been a man, this is what you would have earned, which is quite scary, right? But then after that, we go into the organization and we're going to analyze the HR processes, and performance management is typical, it's what we always look at. And then you look at how are indeed objectives being set? Are these kind of elements considered yes or no? And we look at all sorts of additional kind of explanatory statistics as well. So you look at how are your performance ratings, typically you have a bell curve that's split it by men and women, and we can see if men and women are actually indeed, if gender has an impact on your performance ratings. Or you look at money spent on education, split by gender, promotions, split by gender. So you can have all sorts of additional analytics that help you to understand at a very detailed level if gender equality goes, is in for instance in objective setting considered or not.
Sorry, that was something that I did in my mind. I think that the fact that more companies introduce ESG targets can be an instrument, in a certain sense, to introduce this kind of long-termism and to give more room to women to emerge in their performances, and so in their pay and merit.
Well, I find, sorry, go ahead. I find it a super interesting topic you raise, whether ESG targets are good or bad, specifically if you link ESG targets to executive pay. Because we know it looks good. It looks good if you say I'm going to do something for ESG. But we also know that non-financial performance targets actually lead much more often to payment of executive pay than financial targets. So you will have more pay for your top executives, but I'm not sure you'll have more ESG. So to whatever it comes, the devil is always in the detail. But it's very, my personal conviction, there's no shortcuts. There's no easy fixes. We will do ESG targets in executive compensation, so that's dealt with. Check. Yeah?
Not only at the level of CEO or senior manager.
Yes. I would like to add something on the bonuses and what actually happens in companies that I see sometimes, because when you look at in the analysis, of course, you look at everything. You look at the base pay, but you also look at the full pay, including all bonus and whatever there is. And what we have seen quite a few times is that the moment that companies do this analysis and really see those results, they start to think. And they start to think about their culture, because they then have to decide on the variables that drive pay and that are valuable or not for the company. And usually at this moment, they find out that they are not sure about the variables, and that they see one or two where they think, oh, I thought it was, or I thought it wasn't. And then they start to sort of decide if it's good or not. And with the bonus, I've seen more and more times, and I don't know what your experience is, but I see more and more that they are going away from bonus systems that are very differentiating a lot. They are going more, a German bank even has implemented a bonus system the same for everybody, meaning that the company makes profit, then it's dispersed equally about everybody, because they start to discuss on why we want differences. We are different, so fairness means different as well. But there are certain things which we cannot explain why the difference is logical or good or fair, and that's hidden there very often when they start to discuss, because they think, okay, but the woman that is cleaning, and the man that is just taking the post to the tables, and the other one doing whatever, if they would leave and wouldn't be there tomorrow, the company wouldn't function. They start to really think about the value of each and every one. And they figure out that just because the salespeople are selling and getting a bonus for that sale, the one that's doing the paperwork behind and not doing the sale itself has the same value, because without that one, the other one couldn't work. And when they get to that discussion, that's the moment when they start to figure out their real culture. And then they start to change, hopefully. Most of the time, sometimes slower. But they do find out that they have a culture which they sometimes just don't really know, or they figure it out. Like you said something that you found out that there is a role model, but nobody knows about her being what she is. So they are actually doing something good, and it's working, but nobody realizes it. And that's sort of what I wanted to say, because you cannot really take the status quo now and say, okay, it's not the status quo anymore, it's changing. But you need that transparent first analysis. I always come back to that. That needs to be step number one, because that's the moment when they start thinking.
Thank
after
you.
They've seen the results.
Enrique, Aurore, you would like to add something?
Yes, please. First of all, if most of the time the incentive they are based on base pay, so that's important that you don't have any difference in the base pay, otherwise it will be reflected in the bonus as well. And coming back to a remark that Mr. Made, which is very interesting and important to keep in mind, is that women tend to be more risk adverse, and that translates to the participation in long-term incentives, especially shares, stock options, and so on. So I would encourage any companies to track who is eligible, first of all, in the bonus plans, and secondly, who participates effectively. And if there is a difference in the participation rates between women and men, then maybe you need to put in place an education on these incentives, so to encourage the participation.
Thank you. I saw another question earlier on. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights. It was a great presentation. I just had a quick question about the different variables that you consider are justified or not justified when going from the unadjusted to the adjusted pay gap. So I'm curious, I think we can think of a couple, age, experience, performance, education, but how do you start to really make that ethical decision about what is justified, right? Like, is age, if you see it has a high correlation with the difference in pay, is that justified? Is it age as a proxy for experience because you pay for one's experience in the market, or is it simply because age as a variable itself is a justifiable factor? I'm just curious how you've had conversations with partners, clients.
A fast answer to that, please check out the FPI website and look at the fair pay matrix, because there is a whole list of variables, and they are linked to the SDGs and the WEF, and there you see how others also discuss those metrics and which one could be discriminatory or not, or maybe. So please check that out. But one thing on the proxy of age and experiences, yes, you see that very often, and then they start to think. Because then they think, okay, do we really pay for experience? And what is the experiences that we pay for? Is it the being in our company? Or is it before? Is it like the master? Do we count that? So usually what I have at least seen is that it's a moment where they start to think. And it's funny that sometimes you talk first and they think this is a variable that has a big influence, like performance, big influence. Then they do the analysis and they find out it doesn't. And then they might think, okay, if it doesn't have a big influence, why are we actually using it? Or why do we think that? And then they're again at that point where they think, and maybe they just even leave it out. They know we are not paying for that anymore, or we define it differently. And always performance, we think about implementing a really, really complicated system because we've always been doing it this way, but we find out in the analysis it has no influence. So why should we do that big, complicated system?
Thank you. Anyone wants to react on that? No? No, it's okay. I think that what we can take from this panel, at least, is that, yes, the analysis, looking at the variables, can also trigger discussion within a company and change mentalities, raise awareness, bring discussion to the table, and I think that's all very positive. And if we connect that to what we had heard this morning, it's like awareness-raising campaigns that will also bring awareness to the people, to policymakers. And so it seems that we need all these bits and pieces to make a difference to gender pay gap, and of course, the pay transparency law. And I will make sure that we will advance on that together with all of you. I would like to thank you for this panel, and I will invite you to go back to your seats so that we can... And now I would like to close today's event to first ask for the screening of a video message of Commissioner Helena Dalli.
Marking the European Unequal Pay Day underlines that progress does not happen by itself and that we must push for it to occur. We need to engage and cooperate on different fronts and with different instruments to address this structural imbalance that costs us women dearly at every paycheck. Today we have heard about good practices from different local authorities, companies and stakeholders. As policymakers and decision takers, we must work hand in hand with you to ensure concrete outcomes and make equal pay a reality for everyone. To step up progress, the Commission proposed an initiative for a new law on pay transparency. Transparency is essential to address gender gaps and gender pay discrimination. It makes discrimination visible and hard to ignore or deny. Pay transparency is the start of a process. As we learned from the Belgian example, it is a real game changer, unveiling where the problems are and how we should act. Equal pay is about valuing women's contribution to the economy and society and guaranteeing women's financial and economic independence. Women must be paid fairly for their labor. Through the European Care Strategy, we want to give women and men tools and to put the structures in place to organize their family lives in a balanced way. I thank PES Women and ZIJkant for their ongoing awareness-raising campaigns and for the work with partners such as the City of Brussels to host initiatives like today's. As long as the EU gender pay gap stands, our fight for equality must go on.
And now, Zita Gourmay, please, the floor is yours to close this event.
Thank you very much. Please, hands up who are still okay to go on. Good. I'm absolutely thrilled that so many of you stayed. It shows that our fight is not in vain. And what I think it is absolutely crucial that all of you who sit in this room, beautiful room, which we need more women, but by the way, we already agreed, that you could be our ambassadors and ambassadrices, as the French say. So actually, after this inspiring speech by Commissioner Dalli, I think we can still do more, how to close the gender pay gap, as so many levels. And I understand the willingness that you are ready to make this happen. And of course, it's great to finally have a commissioner on equality. This is itself a long-standing priority for PES Women, and now we see this commissioner focusing on another of our top priorities, which is to close the gender pay gap. And I fully agree with Helena on the need for the Pay Transparency Directive to go through the legislative process as soon as possible. But luckily, we have a European Parliament whose Vice Chair, my great sister, Evelyn Regner, is making the utmost as Shadow Rapporteur to make it happen. So we really need the good dialogue together. And of course, this would contribute substantially the shedding light on areas where women are paid less, simply for the fact that they are women. And I'm repeating again that this is 13% on EU gap, which is absolutely huge. And you heard that considering some EU member states is still over 20%. And of course, this is absolutely unacceptable. Of course, the European Union's institutions are now negotiating the proposal, and this is crucial that during the Czech presidency it's supposed to happen. Hungary is going to be on soon, and they're not very keen on that. So we call on now member states and all actors to push this forward as swiftly as possible. We need this to become an EU law, as you heard from Esther, who has got a great experience, and of course most of our speakers did an amazing job. Special clap hands for all of them, not to forget at the beginning. By the way, it's also a great challenge to find the best and to make sure that you deal always with the best. So our great expert speakers have discussed on the reasons behind the gap. And it has been great to see actors from the public and private sectors. You are all committed to achieving gender equality in this key area. And of course, the best practices can help you also. I already told you that you could be our ambassadors to make it happen. And I'm just repeating what Evelyn Regner said worldwide. The World Economic Forum estimates that women are over 130 years away from achieving equal pay. So not even our grandchildren will see this happen at the current rate. And don't forget, before the COVID crisis, it has 100 years. So the effect of the COVID is absolutely unbearable and huge. So it is an imperative to move forward and, of course, faster. How? We need to act. For this, as the fantastic video we have seen shows, and now a super clap hands for you, because 18 years ago you have been engaged before PS Women, we did it only 2007, and then this man proves really, if the will is there, you can create a great result. So really big clap hands for you. I'm sure everybody learned the name Vera in the room. And of course, don't forget that what type of role is with you at home as well. So we need to draw a clear line between the care economy and the pay gap. And as our speakers have said, equal pay benefits everyone. Women, men, employers, employees, and society as such. So thank you very much for encouraging the conference, which has proven once more that our joint work remains relevant in the EU until we all have equal opportunities and equal pay for equal value of work, of course, but much more, as we have seen, including equality, care, and fair pay, because I think what you also learned today, equal pay does not mean fair play, and we need both equal and fair pay. And thanks again more to our speakers and to Lesia for moderating this event. And I'm sure that Lesia is going to pass the message for Commissioner Helena Dalli. You know that it has been an amazing, rich conference today, and I'm sure that she's going to take over. I trust Lesia, she will do it. And of course, I also would like especially to thank all those who are involved for this great cooperation. ZIJkant, I already mentioned my great sister Vera, and the city of Brussels. I could talk to Lydia, and I said we need to send a strong message after this conference, and let's find the capitals in Europe, you know, where they can continue this great job. I just talked to my neighbor, what about Vienna? We have a feminist Rotemeyer for 30 years, by the way, and there is nothing by chance, I used to say. And of course, it was really important that Brussels hosts this event, and we really look forward to seeing everyone again soon. But by the way, you have the possibility to help us on social media, just to see PES Women newsletter, to tweet, you know, just please be on our side. And if you want to make something common with our network, then please make sure that you direct your great ideas to us, and we can publish it. And of course, don't forget to share our Unequal Pay Day campaign. you have seen first, so that was really the first time ever. Without that, we shared to share the task at home, including mental load, we also spoke about. So let's make this important day a real opportunity for women to close the gender pay gap. If you are all on the board, I think we don't need to wait 130 years. Thank you very much for your great presence. And don't forget, with our great colleagues, with both organizations and the techniques and the interpretation and the communication team, we had a common task. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And one last word, but rest assured, it's short. Drinks are over there.